One early autumn morning, the lifeless body of Melissa Porter was discovered in her car, parked on a secluded road just outside town. Felissa, a local kindergarten teacher beloved by many, had gone missing 2 days prior, leaving behind a worried husband and a community in shock. James Porter, Melissa's husband, was the first to report her missing. James, a mild-mannered accountant, had been frantic with worry, his anxiety evident in the tremor of his voice when he spoke to the police. The discovery of Melissa's body turned his worst fears into a nightmarish reality. Alongside James, 2 other men, Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark, soon came under the scrutiny of the investigation. Both had been intimately involved with Melissa, each harboring deep and complex feelings for her. Detective Sarah Davis, a seasoned investigator with a sharp mind and an unyielding determination for justice, was assigned to the case. As she delved into Melissa's life and the relationships that entwined her with James, Michael, and Joe, it became clear that beneath the surface of this seemingly straightforward case lay a labyrinth of secrets and betrayals. The story of Melissa Porter's demise was not just a tale of a tragic death, but of a tangled web of love, deceit, and vengeance. It was a crisp morning when Officer Tom Harris received a call about an abandoned vehicle on the outskirts of Oakwood. As he approached the scene, the sight of Melissa Porter's car sent a chill down his spine.
The car was parked haphazardly, one wheel on the gravel shoulder, the other on the grassy verge. The windows were fogged, and the faintest hint of a foul odor wafted through the air. Harris peered through the driver's window and recoiled. Melissa Porter was slumped over the steering wheel. Her skin was pallid, and a faint trickle of blood had dried on her temple. The immediate cause of death was not apparent,
but the scene suggested foul play. The small community of Oakwood buzzed with shock and sorrow as news of the discovery spread. Melissa had been missing for 48 hours, and her friends and family had clung to hope that she would return unharmed. Now that hope was cruelly dashed. James Porter was inconsolable, his grief magnified by the public scrutiny he now faced. He had been the one to report Melissa missing, and now he was thrust into the center of a murder investigation. Detective Sarah Davis arrived at the scene, her expression grim. She meticulously inspected the car and the surrounding area, noting the lack of defensive wounds on Melissa's body and the absence of a struggle. This suggested she might have been unconscious or incapacitated before her death. A preliminary examination revealed traces of a powdery substance on the passenger seat, which would later be identified as a potent sedative. Davis ordered the car to be towed to the forensic lab for a thorough examination and instructed her team to canvass the area for witnesses. The investigation had just begun, but the pressure to find answers was immense. The community wanted justice for Melissa, and the police were determined to provide it. The Oakwood Police Department quickly mobilized to investigate Melissa Porter's death. Detective Davis spearheaded the effort, her no-nonsense attitude setting the tone for the team. The first order of business was to question James Porter, whose proximity to the victim made him an initial person of interest. James was brought in for questioning at the station. He looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. Detective Davis began with routine questions about his relationship with Melissa, their recent activities, and his whereabouts during the time she was missing. James explained that he and Melissa had been married for 5 years, a seemingly happy couple in the eyes of the community. He recounted the night Melissa disappeared. She had left the house around 7 p.m., claiming she needed to run some errands. When she didn't return, he grew worried and called the police the next morning. Davis noted his demeanor, searching for signs of deception. James provided an alibi, stating he was home watching TV that night. He offered to let the police verify his story with their home security system's footage. Davis made a mental note to follow up on this lead. As the interview progressed, another name surfaced: Michael Reynolds. According to James, Michael was a close friend of Melissa's, someone she had known for years. James admitted he had always felt a bit uneasy about their relationship, but had no concrete reason to suspect anything untoward. Detective Davis decided to pay Michael a visit. Michael Reynolds, a tall man in his early 30s with an air of easy confidence, welcomed the detectives into his home. He seemed genuinely distraught upon hearing of Melissa's death, insisting they had been just friends. However, his nervous fidgeting suggested there might be more to the story. The investigation widened to include Joe Clark, a local artist who had been seen with Melissa on numerous occasions. Joe, in his mid-40s, was known for his brooding temperament and reclusive lifestyle. He was less forthcoming than Michael, evading direct questions and offering vague, cryptic responses. Detective Davis sensed that both Michael and Joe were hiding something. The threads of Melissa's life began to unravel, revealing a woman who was far more complex and enigmatic than anyone had realized. With each interview, the investigation grew more convoluted, and the stakes became higher. The truth about Melissa's death was buried beneath layers of secrets, and it was up to Davis to dig them out. Melissa Porter was born and raised in Oakwood, a town she loved and never wanted to leave. She was known for her warm smile and her ability to connect with people, traits that made her an excellent kindergarten teacher. Her marriage to James was seen as a match made in heaven, though those closest to her knew there was more beneath the surface. Melissa met James at a charity event 5 years ago. James, an accountant with a stable job and a kind heart, seemed like the perfect partner. They married within a year, and for a while their life together appeared idyllic. But over time, Melissa began to feel restless. The routine of married life left her yearning for something more. Enter Michael Reynolds. Michael and Melissa had been friends since high school. Their bond had always been strong, and there were times when their friendship seemed to border on something deeper. Michael, a charming and successful entrepreneur, offered Melissa the excitement and passion she felt was missing from her marriage. Their relationship, while initially platonic, soon evolved into a secret affair. Melissa found herself torn between the security James provided and the thrill she experienced with Michael. Her feelings for Michael were intense, but they also brought complications and guilt. Then there was Joe Clark. Joe was a local artist, known for his moody paintings and reclusive nature. Melissa met Joe at an art exhibition a year before her death. Joe was different from both James and Michael. He was mysterious and brooding, qualities that fascinated Melissa. Their connection was immediate, and it wasn't long before Melissa found herself involved with Joe as well. Melissa's relationships with Michael and Joe were known only to a few close friends, and she took great pains to keep them hidden from James. However, managing these affairs became increasingly difficult, and Melissa's life grew more complicated. She loved each of these men in different ways, and each offered her something unique. But she also knew that this web of love and deceit could not last forever. As Detective Davis delved deeper into Melissa's background, she discovered a woman who was passionate and vibrant but also deeply conflicted. Melissa's need for connection and excitement had led her down a dangerous path, one that ultimately ended in her untimely death. With Melissa's body discovered and her secret life beginning to surface, suspicion naturally fell on James Porter. Detective Davis scrutinized his alibi, seeking any inconsistencies that might indicate his involvement in his wife's death. James's alibi rested on his claim that he was at home the night Melissa disappeared, watching TV and later falling asleep on the couch. The home security footage confirmed that James had not left the house during the critical hours. However, Davis was not entirely convinced. She knew that alibis could be fabricated or manipulated. The state of the Porters' marriage became a focal point of the investigation. Friends and neighbors painted a picture of a couple that appeared happy, but had their share of issues. Financial records showed that the Porters were struggling with debt, a potential motive for James to want his wife out of the picture. Life insurance policies on Melissa further added to the suspicion. Though the amounts were not exorbitant, James's demeanor during questioning was another point of concern. While his grief seemed genuine, there were moments when his responses were too measured, too controlled. Davis wondered if he was hiding something, or simply trying to protect himself from being wrongfully accused. The most damning piece of evidence was a series of text messages exchanged between James and Melissa in the days leading up to her disappearance. The messages revealed growing tension between them, with Melissa expressing dissatisfaction and James responding with frustration. The arguments, though not overtly violent, indicated a marriage under significant strain. James's interactions with Michael and Joe also raised red flags. Both men admitted to having confrontations with James, who had become increasingly suspicious of their relationships with Melissa. James denied any knowledge of Melissa's affairs, but his anger towards the men was palpable. As the investigation progressed, James Porter remained a prime suspect. His potential motives, financial gain, marital discord, and jealousy, provided enough cause for Detective Davis to keep a close watch on him. However, without concrete evidence linking him directly to the crime, the case against him remained circumstantial. Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark, the two men who had shared intimate relationships with Melissa, were next on Detective Davis's list. Each had their own reasons for wanting Melissa in their lives, and potentially reasons for wanting her gone. Michael Reynolds, with his charismatic demeanor and successful career, seemed an unlikely suspect at first glance. He had been Melissa's confidant for years, their bond evolving into a romantic relationship that brought both joy and complications. Michael's feelings for Melissa were genuine, but his frustration with her indecision and the secrecy of their affair had caused tension. During questioning, Michael admitted to feeling hurt and betrayed when he discovered Melissa's involvement with Joe, but he vehemently denied having anything to do with her death. Joe Clark was a different story. Known for his brooding personality and artistic temperament, Joe had always been somewhat of an enigma. His relationship with Melissa was intense and passionate, but also fraught with jealousy and possessiveness. Joe's art often reflected his tumultuous emotions, and his interactions with Melissa had been no exception. During his interview, Joe was evasive, his answers tinged with bitterness. He expressed deep sorrow over Melissa's death, but also a lingering resentment towards her for being unable to fully commit to him. Davis noted the contrasts between Michael and Joe. One a polished, successful businessman, the other a moody, introspective artist. Both had motives driven by love and jealousy, and both had been deeply affected by Melissa's actions. The detective also discovered that Michael and Joe had confronted each other on several occasions, their arguments escalating as Melissa's relationships with them became more entangled. The investigation into Michael and Joe's backgrounds revealed more layers to Melissa's story. Each man had been drawn to Melissa's vivacious personality and warmth, but both had also experienced the darker sides of their relationships with her. The complexity of these relationships suggested that Melissa's death was not a straightforward case of jealousy or revenge, but rather a culmination of many conflicting emotions and desires. As Detective Davis continued to unravel the intricacies of Melissa's life and relationships, she realized that the truth was buried deep within a web of passion, betrayal, and hidden motives. The challenge was to untangle these threads and find the one that would lead to Melissa's killer. As Detective Davis dug deeper into the lives of Melissa, James, Michael, and Joe, she began to uncover a series of startling revelations and secrets that painted a clearer picture of Melissa's complex world. The first major revelation came from Melissa's close friend, Laura Mitchell. Laura revealed that Melissa had been confiding in her for months about the struggles in her marriage and the turmoil caused by her relationships with Michael and Joe. Melissa had been feeling increasingly trapped and overwhelmed by the dual pressures of maintaining her marriage and managing her affairs. Laura also mentioned that Melissa had expressed fears about someone stalking her, though she never specified who. This new information prompted Davis to re-examine the evidence with fresh eyes. The possibility of a third-party involvement, someone who knew about Melissa's affairs and had a vested interest in her demise, became a compelling angle. Davis ordered a deeper investigation into Melissa's communications and social media, looking for any signs of threats or suspicious activity. The forensic analysis of Melissa's car provided another crucial piece of the puzzle. Traces of the sedative found in the passenger seat matched a prescription registered to Joe Clark. When confronted with this evidence, Joe's calm facade began to crack. He admitted to having the sedative, but claimed he had no intention of harming Melissa. According to Joe, Melissa had asked him for the sedative to help her sleep, a claim that was difficult to verify. Further complicating the investigation was a discovery in Michael's financial records. Large sums of money had been transferred between Michael's accounts and an unknown third party over the past few months. Michael explained that these were business transactions, but the lack of clear documentation raised suspicion. Davis wondered if Michael might have been involved in some form of blackmail or had hired someone to intimidate Melissa. The pressure on all three men intensified as Davis continued to piece together Melissa's last days. Interviews with neighbors and colleagues revealed that Melissa had been planning to leave Oakwood, possibly to escape the tangled relationships she had found herself in. She had been seen packing boxes into her car and had mentioned to a colleague that she needed a fresh start. Then came the biggest revelation of all, a hidden journal found in Melissa's belongings. The journal contained detailed accounts of her relationships with James, Michael, and Joe, as well as her fears and plans for the future. Melissa wrote about feeling suffocated by James's controlling nature, exhilarated by her affair with Michael, and deeply conflicted about her intense connection with Joe. She also mentioned receiving anonymous threats, which she suspected were from someone who knew about her affairs. The journal painted a picture of a woman caught in a web of her own making, desperate to break free but unsure how. It provided Detective Davis with critical insights into Melissa's state of mind and the potential motives of those around her. With this new evidence, Davis felt she was finally closing in on the truth. Just as Detective Davis thought she was getting closer to solving the case, a surprising twist emerged that shifted the focus of the investigation. A new piece of evidence surfaced: a security camera recording from a nearby convenience store that showed Melissa in the company of a man who was neither James, Michael, nor Joe on the night she disappeared. The man in the footage was identified as Daniel Harper, a former colleague of Melissa's from a previous job in a neighboring town. Harper had a checkered past, including a history of violent behavior and a restraining order filed against him by a former girlfriend. The discovery of his involvement with Melissa added a new layer of complexity to the case. Davis brought Harper in for questioning. Harper, a wiry man with a nervous energy, initially denied having seen Melissa recently. However, when confronted with the video evidence, he changed his story. He admitted to meeting Melissa that night, but claimed they had only talked. According to Harper, Melissa had reached out to him because she felt threatened and needed someone to confide in. She had asked Harper to meet her away from Oakwood to avoid being seen by anyone who might know her. Harper's account seemed plausible, but Davis was wary. Harper had a motive: his unrequited feelings for Melissa and his jealousy over her relationships with other men. His past behavior suggested he could be capable of violence, especially if he felt rejected or betrayed. Davis decided to dig deeper into Harper's background and his interactions with Melissa. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of Harper's car revealed traces of the same sedative found in Melissa's vehicle. This new evidence linked Harper directly to the scene of the crime, making him a prime suspect. Harper's story began to unravel under the weight of mounting evidence. He confessed that he had given Melissa the sedative, but insisted it was for her own protection, claiming she had asked for it to calm her nerves. Detective Davis knew that Harper's involvement complicated the narrative, but she also suspected there was more to the story. Harper's account of events didn't entirely align with the evidence. Davis hypothesized that Harper might have been manipulated by someone else, possibly Michael or Joe, to carry out the crime. The idea of a larger conspiracy began to take shape. As Davis continued to press Harper for details, he revealed a startling detail: he had been receiving anonymous payments over the past few months, just like Michael. Harper claimed he didn't know who was behind the payments, but admitted they were meant to ensure his silence about his meetings with Melissa. This revelation pointed to a coordinated effort to keep Melissa's secrets hidden. Davis realized that the investigation had taken a dark turn, one that involved not just a crime of passion, but a calculated plan to silence Melissa permanently. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together, and Davis was determined to uncover the mastermind behind the plot. The investigation took a sinister turn as Detective Davis unraveled the web of deception surrounding Melissa's death. The revelation of anonymous payments and Harper's involvement hinted at a larger, more nefarious plot. Davis now had to consider the possibility that Melissa's death was not just a crime of passion, but a premeditated murder orchestrated by someone with a hidden agenda. Davis's team focused on tracing the source of the payments. Financial records showed a series of transactions funneled through a shell company, eventually leading to an offshore account. The intricate financial trail suggested a high level of planning and resourcefulness, characteristics not typically associated with crimes of passion. This new lead pointed towards someone with significant financial acumen and the means to cover their tracks, potentially Michael Reynolds, given his business background. Davis revisited Michael, armed with the new evidence. Under intense questioning, Michael's confident facade began to crack. He admitted to transferring money to Harper, but insisted it was to help Melissa, not harm her. He claimed Melissa had confided in him about her fears and asked him to arrange for protection, but he had no idea Harper would misuse the funds. Davis was not convinced by Michael's explanation. She suspected that Michael, feeling cornered by Melissa's indecision and the threat of their affair being exposed, had orchestrated a plan to remove her from the equation. However, Michael alone could not have executed such a complex scheme. The involvement of Joe Clark, with his volatile emotions and connection to Melissa, seemed likely. Confronting Joe, Davis presented the evidence of the sedative and the financial transactions. Joe, already unstable, broke down under the pressure. He confessed to being manipulated by Michael, who had convinced him that Melissa was planning to leave both of them and expose their affairs. In a desperate bid to prevent this, Joe agreed to Michael's plan to sedate Melissa and make her disappear. The dark truth emerged. Michael had orchestrated the entire plot, using Joe and Harper as pawns to carry out his plan. Michael's motive was not just jealousy, but a calculated decision to eliminate Melissa and protect his reputation and business interests. Joe, driven by his emotional turmoil, had been an unwitting accomplice, and Harper, lured by money, had played his part without fully understanding the consequences. Davis's investigation had uncovered a chilling conspiracy that highlighted the lengths people would go to protect their secrets and desires. The case was far more complex and darker than anyone had initially imagined, revealing the depths of human deceit and treachery. With the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place, Detective Davis moved swiftly to secure arrest warrants for Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Financial transactions, confessions, and the forensic link between the sedative and Joe. Davis coordinated with her team to ensure that the arrests were conducted smoothly and without incident. Joe Clark was the first to be apprehended. He was found at his studio, surrounded by his hauntingly dark paintings. The arresting officers found him in a state of disarray, his guilt and regret evident. Joe offered no resistance, murmuring apologies and asking about Melissa's final moments. His remorse was genuine, but it could not absolve him of his role in the crime. Michael Reynolds proved more challenging. He had anticipated the arrest and attempted to flee. However, a coordinated effort by the Oakwood Police Department ensured he was apprehended at a private airstrip, trying to board a chartered plane. His arrest was marked by defiance and indignation, maintaining his innocence and accusing the police of fabricating evidence. With both suspects in custody, the prosecution began to build a robust case. The trial that followed was one of the most sensational in Oakwood's history, drawing intense media attention. The courtroom was packed with townspeople, journalists, and those who had known Melissa. The prosecution presented a compelling narrative of manipulation, betrayal, and murder, while the defense tried to paint Michael as a victim of circumstance and Joe as a man driven to desperation. The jury deliberated for several days, weighing the extensive evidence and emotional testimonies. Ultimately, both Michael Reynolds and Joe Clark were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and second-degree murder. Michael received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, while Joe, whose genuine remorse and cooperation were considered, was given a reduced sentence of 25 years. Daniel Harper, whose role was more peripheral, was charged with accessory to murder and received a lesser sentence of 10 years. His involvement, though significant, was viewed as being coerced by the primary conspirators. In the end, Oakwood returned to its peaceful existence, but the memory of Melissa Porter and the lessons learned from her case would never be forgotten. Her story remained a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring quest for truth and justice. At the center of this tragic story were three individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Oliver Holbrook, a charismatic local businessman, Taylor Tanner, a devoted elementary school teacher, and Claire Reeves, a newcomer with a mysterious past. Their fates collided in a perfect storm of desire, jealousy, and deceit that would leave two of them dead and the third forever changed. Oliver Holbrook was born and raised in Millbrook, the only child of Robert and Elizabeth Holbrook. From an early age, it was clear that Oliver was destined for success. His father, a prominent local attorney, instilled in him a strong work ethic and an unwavering ambition. His mother, a former beauty queen turned socialite, taught him the art of charm and social grace. Growing up, Oliver excelled in both academics and athletics. He was captain of the high school football team, president of the student council, and valedictorian of his graduating class. After high school, Oliver attended an Ivy League university where he studied business and economics. But There was another side to Oliver Holbrook, one that few people saw. Behind his winning smile and easy charm lay a calculating mind and an insatiable hunger for control. He was a master manipulator, skilled at identifying people's weaknesses and exploiting them for his own gain. In both business and his personal life, Oliver viewed relationships as transactions, always looking for what he could get out of them. Despite his success, Oliver was never satisfied. He craved constant validation and attention, a need that manifested in a string of romantic conquests. He was known as a ladies' man, leaving a trail of broken hearts in his wake. But as he approached his mid-30s, Oliver began to feel the pressure to settle down, at least outwardly. He knew that having a wife would enhance his image as a respectable businessman and pillar of the community. It was with this mindset that Oliver entered into relationships with both Taylor Tanner and Claire Reeves. In Taylor, he saw the perfect candidate for the role of Mrs. Holbrook, attractive, well-liked, and from a good family. Claire, on the other hand, represented excitement and passion, a secret indulgence he had no intention of giving up. Little did Oliver know that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down, set in motion by the very women he thought he could control. Taylor Tanner was the epitome of the girl next door. Born and raised in Millbrook, she was the middle child in a family of 5, with 2 older brothers and 2 younger sisters. Her parents, Michael and Linda Tanner, were pillars of the community. Her father was the town's beloved family doctor, and her mother was a longtime volunteer at the local animal shelter. Taylor's childhood was marked by warmth and stability. The Tanner household was always bustling with activity, filled with laughter, and the aroma of her mother's home-cooked meals. This nurturing environment shaped Taylor into a compassionate and empathetic young woman, always ready to lend a helping hand or a listening ear to those in need. Upon completing her degree, Taylor secured a position teaching 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary School. It was at a local charity event, organized to raise funds for the school's new library, that Taylor first met Oliver Holbrook. She was immediately drawn to his charisma and confident demeanor. Their courtship was a whirlwind romance that seemed plucked from the pages of a fairy tale. Oliver wooed Taylor with grand gestures, surprise weekend getaways, lavish gifts, and romantic dinners at upscale restaurants. For Taylor, who had always led a relatively simple life, the attention was intoxicating. She fell deeply in love, believing she had found her soulmate. Claire Reeves arrived in Millbrook like a gust of wind, stirring up the quiet town with her mysterious past and alluring presence. Unlike Taylor and Oliver, Claire was an outsider, having grown up in a series of foster homes across the state of New York. Her childhood was marked by instability and loneliness, experiences that shaped her into a complex and often unpredictable adult. Born to a teenage mother who struggled with addiction, Claire was placed in the foster care system at the age of 3. Over the next 15 years, she bounced from one home to another, never staying in one place long enough to form lasting connections. This transient lifestyle left Claire with a deep-seated fear of abandonment and a desperate need for love and acceptance. Despite the challenges of her upbringing, Claire was fiercely intelligent and ambitious. She excelled in school, using her studies as an escape from the chaos of her personal life. Her academic success eventually earned her a scholarship to a prestigious university in New York City, where she studied psychology. After graduation, Claire worked as a marketing executive in Manhattan for several years. She was successful in her career, but her personal life was a series of short-lived, tumultuous relationships. Each failed romance left her feeling more empty and desperate for connection. It was in the wake of a particularly painful breakup that Claire decided to leave the city behind and start fresh. She had inherited a modest sum of money from a former foster mother who had shown her particular kindness, and she used this windfall to buy a small cottage on the outskirts of Millbrook. Claire was drawn to the town's picturesque charm and the promise of a simpler life. Upon her arrival in Millbrook, Claire quickly caught the attention of the locals. Her striking looks and big city sophistication made her stand out in the small town. She found work as a consultant for local businesses, using her marketing expertise to help them expand their reach. It was at one of these consulting jobs that Claire first encountered Oliver Holbrook. The attraction between them was immediate and electric. In Oliver, Claire saw everything she had ever wanted: success, stability, and the promise of love. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to hope for a happy ending. As Claire and Oliver began their clandestine affair, she convinced herself that she had finally found her place in the world. She threw herself into the relationship with the desperation of someone who had never known true belonging. However, Claire's fragile sense of security would soon be shattered by the revelation of Oliver's engagement to Taylor. This betrayal would trigger all of Claire's deepest fears and insecurities, setting in motion a tragic chain of events that would leave an indelible mark on the town of Millbrook. As summer turned to fall in Millbrook, the lives of Oliver, Taylor, and Claire became increasingly entangled in a complex web of desire, deceit, and jealousy. Oliver, ever the skilled manipulator, carefully navigated his relationships with both women, feeding each of them just enough attention and affection to keep them invested. With Taylor, Oliver played the role of the devoted fiancé. He attended local events by her side, charmed her family at Sunday dinners, and made grand plans for their future together. Taylor basked in the glow of their engagement, excitedly sharing details of their upcoming wedding with anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, Oliver's encounters with Claire took place in the shadows. They met in out-of-the-way restaurants in neighboring towns, or at Claire's secluded cottage. During these stolen moments, Oliver showered Claire with the passion and intensity that he carefully held back from Taylor. He fed Claire's hopes with vague promises of a future together, always with the caveat that he needed time to handle things with Taylor. As the weeks passed, tension began to build between Taylor and Claire. Even though Taylor remained unaware of the true nature of Claire's relationship with Oliver, the two women often found themselves at the same local events, with Claire's presence invariably drawing Oliver's attention away from his fiancée. Taylor, trusting and naive, initially tried to befriend Claire. Sensing the newcomer's loneliness, she invited Claire to girls' nights out and community functions, unwittingly providing more opportunities for Oliver and Claire to cross paths. Claire, consumed by her feelings for Oliver and racked with guilt over betraying Taylor's friendly overtures, became increasingly volatile. Her behavior swung between overly solicitous towards Taylor and barely concealed hostility. These mood swings did not go unnoticed by the townspeople, who began to speculate about the source of Claire's apparent instability. Oliver observed the growing friction between the two women, with a mixture of anxiety and satisfaction. While he worried about his carefully constructed double life unraveling, he also reveled in the knowledge that two beautiful women were competing for his affections. As autumn progressed, and the date of Oliver and Taylor's wedding drew nearer, the situation became increasingly untenable. Claire's demands for Oliver to leave Taylor grew more frequent and desperate, while Taylor remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. Little did any of them know that their actions over the next few months would shatter the peaceful facade of Millbrook and change their lives forever. On a crisp October morning, the day of Oliver and Taylor's wedding arrived. The entire town of Millbrook seemed to be in attendance, filling the picturesque white church to capacity. Taylor, radiant in a classic white gown, walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her face beaming with joy and love. Oliver stood at the altar, outwardly the picture of a happy groom, but those who knew him well might have noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that belied his calm exterior. As he recited his vows, promising to love and cherish Taylor for all eternity, his thoughts couldn't help but stray to Claire. Unbeknownst to the happy couple and their guests, Claire was outside the church, hidden from view but close enough to hear the ceremony. Each word of love and devotion that echoed from within the building was like a dagger to her heart. As the church bells rang out, signaling the completion of the ceremony, Claire felt something inside her snap. The reception that followed was a joyous affair, with the entire town celebrating the union of two of its most beloved residents. Taylor danced and laughed, surrounded by friends and family, while Oliver played his role to perfection, ever the charming and attentive new husband. But as the night wore on and the champagne flowed freely, Oliver found his mask slipping. More than once, Taylor caught him staring off into the distance, a troubled expression on his face. When she asked what was wrong, he brushed off her concerns with a quick smile and a kiss. As the newlyweds drove off to their honeymoon, tin cans rattling behind their car and well wishes ringing in their ears, neither of them could have imagined the dark turn their lives were about to take. For in the shadows, Claire Reeves was already plotting her revenge. In the weeks following Oliver and Taylor's wedding, Claire Reeves spiraled into a pit of despair and obsession. The life she had imagined for herself, a future with Oliver, had been snatched away, leaving her feeling betrayed and discarded. Her fragile psyche, already damaged by years of abandonment and instability, began to fracture under the weight of her grief and anger. At first, Claire tried to move on. She threw herself into her work, taking on more consulting projects than ever before. She attempted to socialize, accepting invitations to local gatherings and community events. But everywhere she went, she was confronted with reminders of Oliver and Taylor's happiness. The newlyweds were the talk of the town, their smiling faces seeming to mock Claire at every turn. As her pain deepened, Claire's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started showing up late to meetings or missing them entirely. Her appearance, once impeccable, grew disheveled. Concerned neighbors reported seeing her wandering the streets late at night, muttering to herself. But it was Claire's growing obsession with Taylor that truly marked her descent into madness. She began stalking the young teacher, following her to and from work, watching her house from a distance. Claire convinced herself that if she could just understand Taylor, figure out what made her so special in Oliver's eyes, she could win him back. Claire's cottage became a shrine to her obsession. Walls were covered with photos of Taylor cut from local newspapers and printouts from social media. She created elaborate timelines and diagrams, trying to piece together every detail of Taylor's life and her relationship with Oliver. As weeks turned into months, Claire's fantasies grew darker. She began to imagine scenarios where Taylor was out of the picture, leaving the path clear for her to reclaim Oliver's affections. At first, these were harmless daydreams, Taylor moving away or realizing she didn't love Oliver after all. But gradually, Claire's thoughts turned to murder. She spent hours researching different methods, weighing the pros and cons of each with a detached, almost clinical precision. She created multiple plans, each more elaborate than the last, always careful to cover her tracks and establish alibis. Throughout this time, Claire maintained sporadic contact with Oliver. Their encounters were brief and increasingly tense, with Claire alternating between desperate pleas for him to leave Taylor and icy accusations of betrayal. Oliver, growing uncomfortable with Claire's intensity, began to distance himself, unaware of the dangerous turn her obsession had taken. As winter settled over Millbrook, Claire's plans began to crystallize. She had chosen her method, a staged hit-and-run accident that would leave no trace of her involvement. In her deluded mind, she had convinced herself that eliminating Taylor was not just for her own benefit, but for Oliver's as well. She truly believed that he was trapped in an unhappy marriage and that she would be liberating him. The night before she planned to carry out her deadly scheme, Claire stood in front of her mirror, barely recognizing the wild-eyed woman staring back at her. For a brief moment, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind, but then she remembered the sound of wedding bells, the sight of Oliver kissing his bride, and her resolve hardened once more. On a foggy Wednesday morning in February, Taylor Tanner Holbrook left her house for her daily jog, just as she had done countless times before. The streets were quiet, most of Millbrook's residents still tucked away in their warm beds. Taylor, with her bright yellow running jacket and bouncing ponytail, was a spot of color in the gray landscape. Unbeknownst to Taylor, Claire Reeves was waiting, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She sat in a stolen car at the end of a secluded stretch of road, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. As Taylor's form appeared through the mist, Claire took a deep breath and turned the key in the ignition. The next few moments passed in a blur of screeching tires, a muffled scream, and the sickening thud of impact. Claire, operating on autopilot, quickly drove away from the scene, leaving Taylor's crumpled body on the side of the road. It was a jogger who found Taylor an hour later. By then it was too late. Despite the best efforts of paramedics, Taylor was pronounced dead at the scene. The news spread through Millbrook like wildfire, leaving the town reeling in shock and grief. In the immediate aftermath, Claire's plan seemed to work perfectly. The police initially treated the incident as a tragic hit-and-run accident. Claire had meticulously planned her alibi, making sure she was seen at a 24-hour diner in a neighboring town both before and after the time of Taylor's death. Oliver, upon hearing the news of his wife's death, put on a convincing display of grief. He wept openly at the funeral, leaning on friends and family for support. To all outward appearances, he was a devastated widower, struggling to come to terms with his loss. But as the initial shock wore off and the investigation deepened, cracks began to appear in the facade. Detective Lisa Montague, assigned to the case, sensed that there was more to Taylor's death than a simple accident. As she dug deeper, she began to uncover the tangled web of relationships that had led to this tragic event. Meanwhile, Claire watched from the sidelines, a mix of guilt and triumph warring within her. She had achieved her goal. Taylor was gone. Now surely Oliver would be hers, but as the days passed and Oliver remained distant, doubt began to creep into her mind. Had she made a terrible mistake? In the weeks following Taylor's death, Millbrook was shrouded in a pall of grief and suspicion. The once friendly neighbors now eyed each other warily, wondering if a killer walked among them. Detective Montague's investigation sent ripples through the community as she interviewed friends, family, and acquaintances of Taylor. Oliver Holbrook maintained his role as the grieving widower, making tearful appearances on local news channels and offering a substantial reward for information leading to the arrest of Taylor's killer. He threw himself into charity work in Taylor's name, establishing a foundation to support local education initiatives. Claire, meanwhile, struggled to maintain her composure. The guilt of her actions weighed heavily on her, manifesting in bouts of insomnia and panic attacks. She obsessively followed the news of the investigation, terrified that each day would bring a knock on her door from the police. As Detective Montague delved deeper into Taylor's life, she began to uncover inconsistencies in Oliver's story. Several witnesses reported seeing him arguing with Taylor in the weeks leading up to her death. Financial records showed large, unexplained withdrawals from their joint account. The detective's attention also turned to Claire. Her erratic behavior in the months prior to Taylor's death had not gone unnoticed, and her sudden calming in the aftermath raised suspicions. When questioned, Claire's alibi seemed airtight, but Montague sensed she was hiding something. As winter gave way to spring, Claire's initial elation at having eliminated her rival began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Despite her expectations, Oliver had not rushed into her arms in the wake of Taylor's death. In fact, he had become increasingly distant, avoiding her calls and making excuses to cancel their planned meetings. Frustrated and confused, Claire decided to confront Oliver at his office after hours. As she approached the building, she noticed a light on in his window. Peering inside, she saw Oliver in an intimate embrace with a woman she didn't recognize. The sight sent Claire reeling, her world crumbling around her. In that moment, the full weight of what she had done came crashing down on Claire. She had murdered an innocent woman, destroyed countless lives, all for a man who had never truly cared for her. The realization was devastating. Overwhelmed by guilt and anger, Claire stormed into Oliver's office, catching him and the unknown woman by surprise. What followed was a heated confrontation, with Claire unleashing years of pent-up pain and rage. She accused Oliver of using her, of manipulating her feelings to get rid of Taylor. Oliver, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking, didn't deny her accusations. Instead, he coldly informed Claire that she had served her purpose and was no longer needed. He threatened to expose her role in Taylor's death if she didn't disappear from his life for good. Shattered and desperate, Claire fled the office, her mind racing. She now realized the true extent of Oliver's manipulation and her own terrible mistake. As she drove home in a daze, Claire was unaware that her confrontation with Oliver had been witnessed by someone else, someone who would soon set in motion the final act of this tragic play. The woman Claire had seen with Oliver was Olivia Chen, a brilliant young lawyer who had recently joined Oliver's firm. Olivia had been drawn into an affair with Oliver, seduced by his charm and the promise of career advancement. However, unlike Claire, Olivia was not blind to Oliver's true nature. On the night of Claire's confrontation with Oliver, Olivia had hidden herself in an adjoining room, overhearing every word of their heated exchange. The revelation of Oliver's involvement in his wife's death left her cold with horror and disgust. In the days that followed, Olivia found herself grappling with a moral dilemma. She knew she should go to the police with what she had learned, but fear of professional repercussions and her own complicity in the affair held her back. As she observed Oliver continuing to play the role of grieving widower, her revulsion grew. Determined to uncover the full truth, Olivia began her own covert investigation. She meticulously combed through Oliver's files and emails, slowly piecing together the extent of his deceit. What she discovered went far beyond Taylor's murder, revealing a pattern of fraud and manipulation that spanned years. With each new revelation, Olivia's resolve strengthened. She knew what she had to do. Armed with the evidence she had gathered, Olivia confronted Oliver in his office late one evening. She laid out everything she had discovered, from his manipulation of Claire to his fraudulent business practices. Oliver, realizing the precariousness of his situation, attempted to charm and threaten Olivia into silence. But Olivia was prepared. She had secretly recorded their entire conversation, capturing Oliver's implicit admission of guilt. As she turned to leave, intending to take her evidence to the police, Oliver snapped. In a moment of panic and rage, he attacked Olivia, attempting to wrestle the recording device from her hands. What Oliver didn't know was that Olivia, haunted by the fate of Taylor Tanner Holbrook, had come prepared. In the struggle, she managed to reach into her purse and pull out a small pistol. A shot rang out, echoing through the empty office building. Oliver Holbrook, the man who had manipulated so many, who had indirectly caused the death of his wife and the ruin of Claire Reeves, crumpled to the floor. Olivia stood over him, the smoking gun still in her hand, a mix of shock and grim satisfaction on her face. As sirens wailed in the distance, Olivia calmly sat down to wait for the police. She knew that her actions would have consequences, but she also knew that the truth would finally come to light. Oliver Holbrook's reign of deception was over. The shot that killed Oliver Holbrook reverberated through Millbrook, setting off a chain reaction that would finally bring the full story of Taylor's death to light. As Olivia Chen was taken into custody, the true extent of Oliver's manipulations began to unravel. In the wake of Oliver Holbrook's death, the investigation into Taylor's murder took on new urgency. Detective Montague, armed with the evidence Olivia had gathered, began to piece together the full picture of events that had transpired over the past year. Claire Reeves, racked with guilt and fear, finally broke down under questioning. She confessed to her role in Taylor's death, providing a detailed account of her actions and motivations. Her testimony painted a damning picture of Oliver's manipulation and the extent to which he had orchestrated the events leading to his wife's murder. Claire, having confessed to Taylor's murder, was sentenced to life in prison. Olivia's case was more complex. She was convicted of manslaughter, but received a reduced sentence due to the circumstances surrounding Oliver's death. The tragic tale of Oliver Holbrook, Taylor Tanner, Claire Reeves, and Olivia Chen would be remembered for years to come, a somber reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath even the most picturesque surfaces. The crisp September air in New Hampshire's northern wilderness carried more than just the promise of autumn that morning. Bear hunters, their boots crackling through fallen leaves, discovered something far more disturbing than their intended quarry. In a clearing not meant for camping, they found a woman, disheveled, armed, and clearly out of place in the remote bear baiting zone. The hunters' initial annoyance at finding an illegal camper quickly transformed into unease. The woman, later identified as Brittany Barron, sat near a hastily erected tent, a firearm within reach. Her demeanor was oddly calm, yet her eyes held a haunted look that made even seasoned outdoorsmen step back. When they ordered her to leave, she nodded mechanically but made no move to pack up. The vast New Hampshire wilderness stretched around them, 600 hectares of protected state forest, its dense canopy creating shadows that seemed to hide countless secrets. The location was deliberate. No surveillance cameras, no casual hikers, just miles of isolated forest where the boundary between predator and prey became disturbingly blurred. When local fish and game officers arrived, responding to the hunter's report, they immediately sensed something was wrong. The woman's tent was positioned away from designated camping areas, hidden from main trails. More disturbing was her armed presence in an active bear hunting zone, a potentially lethal combination of circumstances that made no logical sense. The officers' training kicked in as they approached. Everything about the scene felt wrong. The woman's resigned demeanor, the careful positioning of the tent, the presence of tools that seemed excessive for a simple camping trip. When they finally confronted her, Brittany's response sent chills through even the most experienced officers. "I'm in a lot of trouble," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying above the whisper of wind through the trees. To understand how Brittany Barron ended up in those woods, we must first travel back to Las Cruces, New Mexico, where two teenagers' paths crossed in a way that would ultimately lead to tragedy. Brittany and Armando Barron's love story began like many others, young hearts finding each other in high school hallways, dreaming of a future together.
Their romance bloomed under the New Mexico sun, intense and all-consuming as only teenage love can be. Marriage followed quickly when both were just 18, their youth and passion convincing them they could conquer any obstacle together. In 2014, when Armando's family decided to relocate to New Hampshire, the young couple, now with their first daughter, followed. The move to Jeffrey, a picturesque town of 5,500 souls, seemed like a fresh start. Jeffrey, New Hampshire, with its postcard-perfect landscapes and tight-knit community, appeared to be the ideal setting for their growing family. They settled into 2 adjacent houses with Armando's family, an arrangement that promised both independence and support. Soon, their family expanded to include 3 children. Their eldest daughter, now 9, and 2 younger siblings, their youngest just 2 years old. But beneath the surface of this picture-perfect family life, cracks were forming. Armando, unable to access the banking system or hold steady employment for undisclosed reasons, stayed home to homeschool their children. Meanwhile, Brittany became the family's breadwinner, working as a machine operator at Teleflex, a medical technology company. The role reversal created tensions that would eventually spiral into violence. Enter Jonathan Amaral, the third player in this tragic triangle. At 25, Jonathan represented everything Armando wasn't. Born in Rambouillet, Maine, but raised in Milford, Connecticut, Jonathan's life was a testament to achievement and dedication. As captain of his high school athletic teams, he showed early leadership qualities. His volunteer work at the Boys and Girls Club of South Gambale earned him recognition from both the Bush and Obama administrations as Youth Volunteer of the Year. Jonathan's academic success matched his athletic achievements. At Rochester Institute of Technology, he earned his biomedical engineering degree with honors. But it was his passion for outdoor adventure that truly defined him. By age 25, he had climbed 66 of the 67 mountains over 1,200 meters in his area and 48 peaks in New Hampshire. He was just 1 summit shy of completing New England's 100 highest peaks, a goal he would never achieve. His social media presence showed a young man fully engaged with life, sharing not just his climbing achievements but also offering guidance to novice hikers. Recently having purchased his own home, which he was renovating himself, Jonathan embodied the American dream. His position as a biomedical engineer at Teleflex was just the latest step in what promised to be a brilliant career. Teleflex's corporate culture emphasized collaboration and innovation, creating an environment where paths naturally crossed. Brittany and Jonathan's initial interactions were purely professional, 2 colleagues working on a shared project. The company's modern facility in New Hampshire housed various departments, and their paths began intersecting more frequently as project demands increased. Brittany, like many of her female colleagues, couldn't help but notice Jonathan's striking appearance. His physical resemblance to a model led to his workplace nickname Abercrombie, a playful reference that would later take on darker significance. But it wasn't just his looks that drew attention. Jonathan's kindness and professional competence made him stand out in the corporate environment. Their friendship developed gradually, built on shared work experiences and casual conversations. However, as their connection grew stronger, the warning signs in Brittany's marriage became more apparent. The contrast between Jonathan's gentle demeanor and her home life threw her domestic situation into sharp relief. While Brittany excelled at work, earning praise as a reliable employee, her home life was deteriorating. Armando's controlling behavior escalated, though few outside their immediate family knew the extent of their problems. The facade of family unity began cracking under the weight of financial stress, Armando's unemployment, and increasing domestic tension. By September 2020, Brittany had been silently struggling with her marriage for over a year. The professional environment at Teleflex, with its normalcy and respect, became a refuge from her increasingly volatile home life. Jonathan, unknowingly, represented everything her marriage lacked: stability, success, and genuine kindness. Their workplace interactions, though innocent, provided Brittany with a glimpse of what a healthy relationship could look like. She saw in Jonathan someone who had achieved success through hard work and dedication, qualities that starkly contrasted with her husband's situation. But what started as harmless workplace friendship would soon catalyze a series of events that would end in tragedy. The warning signs were there, subtle but persistent. Brittany's occasional withdrawn behavior at work, her careful avoidance of discussing her home life, and the way she flinched at sudden movements, all indicators of domestic trouble that, in hindsight, painted a clear picture of a woman trapped in an increasingly dangerous situation. As summer turned to fall in 2020, these three lives, Brittany's, Armando's, and Jonathan's, were set on a collision course that would end in violence in the New Hampshire wilderness. The perfect life that Brittany had tried to maintain, balancing work and family, was about to shatter in ways no one could have predicted. The stage was set for a tragedy that would shock the quiet community of Jeffrey and leave an indelible mark on all who knew the people involved. September 2020 marked a critical turning point in the lives of everyone involved. Brittany Barron, after enduring a deteriorating domestic situation for over a year, made the decision that would set tragic events in motion. During the second week of September, she approached Armando with what seemed a reasonable request: a divorce that would allow both parents to remain involved in their children's lives. The response revealed the true nature of their relationship. In their family home, with their children nearby, Armando's reaction turned violent. The physical assault left Brittany unconscious, and upon regaining awareness, she faced further abuse. This incident, while severe, represented an escalation of existing patterns rather than an isolated event. The contrast between Brittany's home life and work environment became increasingly stark. At Teleflex, she found respect and normal human interaction, particularly in her growing friendship with Jonathan Amaral. Their connection, beginning through shared work projects, developed through careful messages on Snapchat, creating a space beyond Armando's controlling influence. Their relationship progressed cautiously. A brief meeting in a park near work, where they left Brittany's car in the company lot to avoid detection, led to conversations about their lives and a momentary display of affection. Another brief encounter during a work break showed Brittany what a relationship built on mutual respect might feel like. However, these innocent interactions would soon trigger devastating consequences. The events of September 19, 2020, unfolded with terrible precision. That evening, while Brittany was in the bathroom, Armando accessed her phone, discovering the messages between his wife and Jonathan. The presence of their 9-year-old daughter added another layer of trauma to what followed. Recognizing the situation was escalating, Armando took their 3 children to his mother's adjacent house. What might have appeared as a protective action instead cleared the way for what followed. Upon returning, the domestic violence intensified. The investigation would later document the extent of Brittany's injuries from this assault. Technology became a weapon as Armando used Brittany's phone to create a false narrative. The choice of Annette State Forest, 600 hectares of protected wilderness without surveillance, demonstrated careful selection of location. Cell phone records would later prove crucial in reconstructing the sequence of events. Jonathan, responding to what he believed was a message from Brittany, arrived at the forest unaware of the danger. The subsequent events would shock the community and raise serious questions about domestic violence, control, and the devastating impact of jealousy. The prosecution would later build their case around premeditation, noting the careful selection of location and sequence of events. The defense would argue about states of mind and degrees of culpability. The investigation would piece together the timeline through cell phone records, witness statements, and forensic evidence. Brittany's actions during these events would be examined through the lens of coercive control and duress. Experts in domestic violence would later testify about the psychological impact of long-term abuse and the complex dynamics that can lead victims to comply with their abuser's demands. The authorities' reconstruction would reveal how domestic violence escalated into a premeditated act. Evidence collected painted a picture of calculated actions rather than a crime of passion, from the selection of location to the use of technology to lure the victim, and subsequent attempts to conceal evidence. Jonathan's final moments revealed his character. Even in extremis, he maintained his dignity. His last recorded words, asking about the possibility of survival, demonstrated the tragic optimism that had characterized his life. The young man who had nearly achieved his goal of climbing New England's 100 highest peaks would never complete that ambition. The aftermath saw methodical attempts to hide evidence, with Brittany following instructions under what her attorneys would later argue was extreme duress. The prosecution would counter that she had opportunities to seek help but didn't take them.
This complex dynamic would become central to the legal proceedings that followed. Digital forensics would prove crucial to the investigation, documenting not just the fatal deception but also capturing the earlier progression of control and isolation that characterized the Baron's marriage. Cell phone records revealed deleted messages, location data, and attempts to create false alibis. The involvement of the Baron's eldest child as a witness to early events added another layer of tragedy. Child psychologists would later become involved, helping the children process what they had experienced. The generational impact of domestic violence would become a significant focus of social services intervention. In Jeffrey's quiet community, these events shattered illusions about safety and stability. They forced conversations about domestic violence, control, and the masks that abusers often wear in public. The case became a catalyst for change in how the community approached domestic violence prevention and intervention. Various witnesses would later reconstruct the sequence of events, demonstrating how quickly domestic violence can escalate when control is threatened. The evidence collected would prove the premeditated nature of some actions while highlighting the chaotic aftermath of others. The investigation would examine how different choices at various points might have led to different outcomes. This analysis would later inform domestic violence intervention training for local law enforcement and workplace harassment protocols for area businesses. As the community struggled to comprehend these events, focus shifted toward prevention and recognition of warning signs. The case became a teaching tool for domestic violence awareness programs, highlighting how controlling behavior can escalate when victims attempt to leave their abusers. Jonathan's legacy would live on through changes in workplace safety protocols and domestic violence intervention strategies. His tragic end sparked discussions about the responsibility of colleagues and employers to recognize and respond to signs of domestic abuse among their employees. The events of September 2020 forever changed multiple families and an entire community, leaving behind crucial lessons about the importance of recognizing and addressing domestic violence before it reaches a point of no return. The case would lead to significant changes in how communities handle domestic violence cases and how workplaces protect employees facing abuse. In the aftermath, the focus turned to understanding how such tragedy could have been prevented. The warning signs, the escalation patterns, and the missed opportunities for intervention would all become subjects of study and reflection. The case would ultimately serve as a powerful reminder of the devastating potential of domestic violence and the critical importance of early intervention. The descent from domestic tension to tragic conclusion would become a case study in how controlling behavior, when unchecked, can escalate to unthinkable conclusions. It would also highlight the importance of supporting those attempting to leave abusive relationships, recognizing that the period of separation often represents the highest risk for escalating violence. The drive north through New Hampshire's autumn darkness marked the beginning of a desperate attempt to conceal evidence of the tragedy that had unfolded at Annette State Forest. Brittany Baron, operating under extreme duress and psychological trauma, followed Armando's detailed instructions as they traveled the 220 kilometers toward the northern wilderness near Atkinson and Gilmanton Academy Grant. Throughout the journey, Armando maintained constant surveillance, following in the family's jeep while keeping an open phone line with Brittany, a detail that would later prove crucial to investigators building their case. The manipulation of technology to maintain control would become a significant element of the prosecution's argument about premeditation and calculated behavior. Their route took them through small towns where security cameras silently recorded their passage. At a general store, Armando purchased supplies that would later become evidence: tarps, lighter fluid, cleaning materials, and a shovel. The seemingly routine transaction, captured on store surveillance, would help prosecutors establish the timeline of events. Brittany's psychological state during these hours reflected the complex trauma responses that domestic violence experts would later discuss in court. Operating under what psychologists term traumatic compliance, her actions were driven by a combination of shock, fear, and the instinct for survival. Her testimony would later reveal how Armando's previous violence and threats created a state of psychological captivity that extended beyond physical control. In the remote campsite beyond the designated camping areas, Brittany followed Armando's specific instructions for disposing of evidence. Her compliance, which would later raise difficult questions during legal proceedings, demonstrated the powerful effects of coercive control and fear. Mental health professionals would testify about how trauma can impact decision-making and agency. Meanwhile, in another part of New Hampshire, Jonathan's absence was already causing concern. His mother, Justin Amaral, accustomed to regular communication with her son, grew worried when she couldn't reach him on Sunday, September 20th. Her Monday morning call to his workplace set in motion the investigation that would eventually unravel the terrible events of the weekend. The initial missing persons report filed by Justin Amaral contained details that immediately caught investigators' attention. Jonathan's perfect attendance record at work, his reliable communication habits, and his planned mountain climbing activities created a profile that made his disappearance highly suspicious. The discovery that another employee, Brittany, was also absent added another layer of concern. Police began methodically piecing together the connections. Interviews with Teleflex employees revealed the workplace relationship between Jonathan and Brittany. Surveillance footage from the company parking lot provided crucial timeline information. Cell phone records began painting a picture of movement and communication that contradicted initial statements. Armando's first interview with police raised immediate red flags. His story about leaving Brittany on the roadside near Temple Mountain in the early hours of Sunday morning struck investigators as implausible. His claim of driving to Errol and back, a 6-hour round trip, seemed designed to establish an alibi rather than explain genuine events. The discovery of the campsite by bear hunters on Tuesday morning marked a critical turning point. The hunters' initial annoyance at finding an illegal camper in their baiting area transformed into concern when they observed Brittany's unusual behavior and armed presence. Their report to fish and game officers initiated the sequence of events that would break the case open. When authorities arrived at the campsite, Brittany's first words, "I'm in a lot of trouble," signaled the beginning of the case's unraveling. Her subsequent cooperation with law enforcement revealed the full scope of the tragedy and the elaborate attempts to conceal evidence. The recovery operation that followed would require multiple agencies and careful forensic documentation. Brittany's detailed confession provided investigators with crucial information about evidence locations and disposal methods. Her account of being forced to follow Armando's instructions helped explain the complex pattern of evidence that investigators were discovering. The psychological trauma evident in her statement would later influence discussions about criminal culpability and domestic violence. The forensic investigation revealed a methodical attempt to destroy evidence. Analysis of burn patterns, DNA evidence, and tool marks helped reconstruct the sequence of events. Cell phone data proved particularly valuable, documenting movements and communications that corroborated Brittany's account of events. Examination of Jonathan's Subaru Impreza, hidden in the forest, revealed careful cleaning attempts but also provided crucial forensic evidence. Blood spatter patterns, DNA analysis, and ballistic evidence helped prosecutors build their case. The vehicle's location and condition supported the premeditated nature of the crime. As investigators pieced together the evidence, Armando's behavior became increasingly suspicious. His attempt to flee with his 9-year-old daughter led to a police pursuit and arrest. The items found in his vehicle, oil containers, a shovel, concrete, and freshly purchased soil, supported the prosecution's theory of planned concealment. The impact on the Barron children emerged as a critical concern for social services. The eldest daughter's exposure to the initial violence, the sudden loss of both parents, and the trauma of the events required immediate intervention. Child psychologists began the delicate work of helping the children process their experiences while protecting them from further trauma. The case's psychological complexity emerged through expert analysis. Brittany's actions under duress, her compliance with Armando's instructions, and her eventual cooperation with law enforcement illustrated the complicated dynamics of domestic violence and trauma response. Mental health professionals would later testify about the impact of prolonged abuse on decision-making and behavior. The evidence recovery process continued for days, with investigators methodically documenting and collecting items that would prove crucial in court. Forensic teams worked to preserve evidence despite exposure to weather and wildlife. Their findings would help prosecutors establish the premeditated nature of the crime and the elaborate attempts to conceal it. Armando's arrest during his attempted flight with his daughter added another layer of tragedy to the case. The discovery of materials intended for further concealment efforts demonstrated his continued attempts to avoid responsibility. The impact on his daughter,
who witnessed his arrest, added to the psychological trauma the children would need to process. The community struggled to comprehend the events that had unfolded in their quiet corner of New Hampshire. The case raised difficult questions about domestic violence, workplace relationships, and the hidden dangers that can lurk beneath seemingly normal facades. Local organizations began examining their protocols for identifying and responding to domestic violence. The investigation's findings would ultimately lead to significant changes in how local law enforcement approached domestic violence cases. The complex interplay of control, fear, and trauma evident in Brittany's actions prompted reviews of how police assess domestic violence situations. Training programs were updated to better recognize the signs of coercive control. The recovery of evidence painted a picture of calculated actions rather than crimes of passion. Cell phone records, security camera footage, and physical evidence created a timeline that demonstrated planning and premeditation. The prosecution would use this evidence to argue for the maximum penalties allowed by law. The impact on Jonathan's family became a central element of the case's human dimension. His parents' grief was compounded by the gradual revelation of details about their son's final hours. Their advocacy would later influence changes in workplace safety protocols and domestic violence intervention strategies. The children's welfare became a priority for social services and mental health professionals. The complex trauma they experienced required specialized intervention and ongoing support. Their story highlighted the generational impact of domestic violence and the importance of early intervention in troubled families. As the case moved toward prosecution, the evidence gathered during these crucial days would prove instrumental in securing convictions. The careful documentation of physical evidence, witness statements, and forensic findings created a compelling case that would ultimately lead to justice for Jonathan and reveal the true nature of domestic violence's devastating potential. The aftermath of these events would continue to influence the community's approach to domestic violence, workplace safety, and mental health intervention. The tragic lessons learned would lead to changes in policy, procedure, and public awareness, ensuring that Jonathan's death would contribute to preventing future tragedies. The wheels of justice began turning with multiple indictments being filed in New Hampshire's Superior Court. Brittany Barron faced 3 charges of falsifying physical evidence, while Armando Barron's charges were more extensive, including capital murder, first-degree murder as an alternative charge, criminal solicitation of murder, kidnapping, second-degree assault, and domestic violence. Brittany's legal team negotiated a plea agreement that acknowledged her role while recognizing the coercion she faced. In exchange for her cooperation with prosecutors and testimony against Armando, she would plead guilty to the evidence tampering charges. The agreement included requirements to pay for Jonathan's funeral expenses and undergo mental health treatment. During the plea hearing, Jonathan's mother, Justin Amaral, expressed her view that the deal was too lenient. However, prosecutors explained that Brittany's testimony would be crucial in securing a conviction against the primary perpetrator. This highlighted the complex balance between justice and pragmatic legal strategy. The evidence presentation began with forensic analysis. Dr. Jenny Duval, New Hampshire's chief medical examiner, provided detailed testimony about the findings. Ballistics expert Gil Terrier identified the murder weapon as a Taurus revolver, confirming through analysis that 2 bullets recovered from the scene matched this weapon. Cell phone evidence proved particularly compelling. Digital forensics experts reconstructed communication patterns and movements through cell tower data. The prosecution used this to establish a timeline that contradicted Armando's initial statements to police. Rachel Martinez, a fingerprint specialist from the police forensic laboratory, testified about fingerprint evidence found on Jonathan's vehicle. While Armando's left handprints were identified on the rear spoiler, DNA evidence was largely absent from most recovered items, a detail that would feature in both prosecution and defense arguments. The trial's most powerful testimony came from Brittany herself. Over several hours, she detailed the progression of events, describing the domestic violence that preceded the murder and the psychological control that influenced her actions. Her account of Jonathan's final moments moved many in the courtroom to tears. Child welfare experts testified about the impact on the Barron children, particularly their 9-year-old daughter who witnessed early violence. Their testimony highlighted the generational trauma of domestic violence and informed later sentencing considerations.
Domestic violence experts explained the psychology of coercive control and trauma bonding. Their testimony helped contextualize Brittany's actions and illuminated the complex dynamics of abusive relationships. This expertise proved crucial in helping the jury understand the case's psychological dimensions. Police investigators recounted finding surveillance footage that tracked the vehicle's movements on the night in question. Their testimony established a clear timeline that supported the prosecution's case for premeditation. Evidence from the general store where supplies were purchased further corroborated this timeline. The prosecution built their case methodically, demonstrating how domestic violence escalated to murder when control was threatened. They emphasized Armando's careful planning and subsequent attempts to conceal evidence. The defense attempted to challenge evidence handling procedures and questioned the reliability of cell phone data. Armando Barron chose not to testify in his own defense, exercising his Fifth Amendment rights. His silence left the jury to consider only the evidence and testimony presented by others. His demeanor throughout the trial remained notably impassive. The most emotionally charged moments came during impact statements. Justin Amaral, Jonathan's mother, spoke of her son's character and achievements. She described him as brilliant and compassionate, highlighting his volunteer work and personal goals. Her words painted a picture of a life full of promise cut tragically short. Jonathan's father's statement focused on the senseless nature of the crime and its devastating impact on their family. His emotional testimony resonated with the jury and spectators alike. The parents' grief and dignity in the face of tragedy left a lasting impression on the proceedings. After receiving final instructions from Judge Elizabeth Leonard, the jury retired to deliberate. They would consider 13 separate charges against Armando Barron. Their deliberations lasted just 2 hours, remarkably brief given the case's complexity. The verdict announcement brought Jonathan's mother to tears while Armando remained expressionless. The jury found him guilty on all 13 counts, including first-degree murder. The comprehensive guilty verdict reflected the strength of the prosecution's case and the jury's conviction that this was indeed a premeditated act. Judge Leonard's sentencing statement was particularly powerful. She acknowledged the parents' courage in attending the trial and reliving their son's final moments. Her words to Armando were direct and unequivocal, condemning both his actions and his lack of remorse. The sentence reflected the gravity of the crimes: life imprisonment without possibility of parole for the first-degree murder charge, plus 45 to 135 consecutive years for the remaining charges. Additional restitution of over $13,000 was ordered paid to Jonathan's family. Brittany's earlier sentence of 3 to 7 years, with parole possibility after 18 months, acknowledged both her cooperation and the coercion she faced. Her testimony proved instrumental in securing justice for Jonathan. The case led to significant changes in how domestic violence cases are handled in New Hampshire. Law enforcement protocols were updated to better recognize signs of coercive control. Workplace safety measures were enhanced to protect employees facing domestic violence. Jonathan's legacy lives on through these changes and through his family's advocacy for domestic violence prevention. His friends honored his memory by completing his goal of climbing all 100 peaks of New England, carrying his spirit to the summit he never reached. The case serves as a powerful reminder of domestic violence's devastating potential and the importance of recognizing warning signs. It highlights the critical period of risk when victims attempt to leave abusive relationships and the need for better support systems. The proceedings also demonstrated the complexity of domestic violence cases, where victims may be coerced into participating in crimes. This understanding has influenced how similar cases are now handled in the New Hampshire justice system. The impact on the Barron children remains a crucial concern. Social services and mental health professionals continue working to help them process their trauma and build resilient futures. Their story underscores the importance of supporting children affected by domestic violence. Ultimately, this case changed how an entire community views domestic violence. It sparked important conversations about control, abuse, and the responsibility of bystanders to recognize and report warning signs. These discussions continue to influence policy and practice in New Hampshire and beyond. The pursuit of justice in this case revealed both the strengths and limitations of the legal system in addressing domestic violence. While the perpetrator was held accountable,
The tragedy's prevention might have been possible with earlier intervention and better recognition of warning signs. The case also highlighted the crucial role of forensic evidence and expert testimony in achieving justice. The methodical collection and presentation of evidence, combined with expert interpretation, proved decisive in securing convictions. The sentencing marked not an end but a beginning of ongoing efforts to prevent similar tragedies. Jonathan's story continues to educate and inspire action against domestic violence, ensuring that his death contributes to protecting others from similar fates.
Today, we delve into a chilling case from Naples, Florida, in January 2005. A young man's dreams were abruptly ended in a scheme fueled by obsession, envy, and an intense longing for youth. Ethan Wright was a 20-year-old college student thriving in Naples, a locale renowned for its lively retirees, seasonal visitors, and the hidden lives of young individuals who cater to them. Ethan was enthusiastic about coffee and aspired to own his own cafe someday. Known among friends for his deep interest in coffee culture, he loved crafting new blends and perfecting his brewing techniques. Ethan was enrolled at a local community college, focusing on business management to pave the way for his cafe dreams. He worked part-time as a barista at a popular local coffee shop, where his innovative creations were starting to get noticed for their unique flavors, often challenging Maple's preference for traditional brews. Ethan was well regarded by his peers, celebrated for his amiable nature, and his knack for making those around him feel at ease. His engaging personality wasn't just a hit with his friends. He also charmed the older clientele at high-end coffee tasting events, where his skills were in high demand. Ethan was bold and spirited, always on the lookout for new connections and adventures in life, love, and especially in coffee. In the days leading up to his tragic end, Ethan was thrilled about a new opportunity to showcase his latest coffee blend at one of Maple's premier events. His excitement was palpable in every discussion with friends and colleagues. He aimed to carve out a name for himself in the bustling cafe scene and saw this event as a breakthrough. Ethan harbored grand ambitions. He dreamed of traveling the world to explore diverse coffee cultures and someday competing in national barista competitions. He even mused about moving to Seattle to immerse himself in its famed coffee scene. Yet, all his aspirations were halted by a sinister plot that unfolded unnoticed. On the morning of January 15, 2005, Maples was just starting to stir under a clear, cool dawn. Around 8 a.m., Ethan Wright's roommate, Alex Reed, sensed that something was amiss. Ethan hadn't left for his early shift at the local coffee shop, which was out of character. Ethan was usually up with the first light, ready to embrace the day. Alex, concerned, tapped on Ethan's bedroom door, but got no reply. Deciding to check, what he discovered would forever be imprinted in his memory. Ethan lay on his bed, motionless, his skin pale and lifeless. The room, typically filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee or experimental blends, was now unsettlingly silent, marked by a faint, distressing odor. No signs of struggle were evident, no furniture appended or items displaced. It appeared as though Ethan had simply drifted off to sleep and never awakened. Shock rooted Alex to the spot as he stared in disbelief. Panic quickly set in. He scrambled for his phone and dialed 911, his voice breaking as he shakily recounted finding his best friend unresponsive. When the paramedics arrived, they confirmed Alex's worst fears. Ethan was dead. Police soon followed, their sirens cutting through the morning quiet, the flashing lights casting eerie shadows inside the modest apartment. The scene felt surreal, the morning's tranquility shattered by the stark reality of death. Alex, overwhelmed by shock, struggled to grasp the magnitude of what had occurred. The responding officers gently urged him out to start their inquiry. Later at the police station, he was visibly distraught, unable to fathom the enormity of his loss. Ethan's body was transported to the local medical examiner for an autopsy as the investigation into his enigmatic death commenced. Unbeknownst to all, this was merely the start of a complex, sinister tale. The Naples Police Department responded swiftly to the 911 call from Ethan Wright's apartment on the morning of January 15, 2005. Leading the charge was Detective James McCarthy, a veteran officer known for his thorough investigative skills. The scene at Ethan's apartment was eerily silent. Everything appeared untouched, and Ethan's body lay peacefully, hinting at an unnatural cause of death. As McCarthy and his team entered Ethan's bedroom, the absence of visible violence struck them. No blood, No weapons, no signs of a struggle. Ethan appeared to have simply fallen asleep and not woken up. However, upon closer inspection, Detective McCarthy grew suspicious of more sinister undertone. Ethan's pale complexion and the slight bluish hue around his lips suggested possible poisoning. The team meticulously documented the scene, photographing every detail from the neatly kept bed to the half-drunk cup of coffee on the nightstand. They collected potential evidence, including Dr. Cameron immediately requested a full toxicology report to pinpoint the substance responsible for Ethan's sudden demise. The investigation widened as police questioned Alex Reed, Ethan's roommate, who, though still in shock, provided full cooperation. Alex recounted Ethan's recent activities, highlighting his excitement and Sophia had spent the morning at the restaurant, finalizing preparations for a big dinner service. David had left early, mumbling something about running errands and meeting a friend for coffee. As Sophia drove home, her mind filled with last-minute thoughts about the evening's menu, she decided on a whim to stop by her mother's bookstore for a quick chat. Perhaps a cup of tea and a familiar face would soothe her anxious mind. But as she turned onto the quiet street leading to Maggie's shop, her heart froze. There, tucked away behind the bookstore, was David's car. For a moment, Sophia sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to convince herself there was an innocent reason for his presence. But deep down, she already knew the truth. With trembling legs, Sophia approached her mother's bookstore. The curtains were mostly drawn, but through a small gap, she could see movement inside. Steeling herself with a deep breath, she quietly unlocked the door with her spare key and pushed it open as silently as she could. The scene that met her eyes would be etched in her mind forever. On a cozy, well-worn leather couch, David and Maggie were locked in an intimate embrace, completely unaware of the world outside. Maggie's usually tidy hair was tousled, and David's shirt was partly unbuttoned. On the small coffee table, 2 half-empty cups of tea stood as silent witnesses to their betrayal. For a moment, Sophia felt time stop. Then, as if sensing her presence, David and Maggie looked up, their faces a mix of shock, guilt, and something close to defiance. What followed was a whirlwind of emotions and accusation. Sophia's anguished cry shattered the silence, jolting the guilty pair out of their daze. David stumbled to his feet, stammering out half-formed excuses and pleas. Maggie stayed seated, her face drained of color, tears streaking down her cheeks. Sophia, her voice raw with pain and fury, hurled question after question at them. When they finally spoke, the truth cut like a knife. 6 months. It had started as innocent conversations, then slowly turned into something more. They claimed they never intended for it to go this far. They said they were sorry, but Sophia couldn't bear to hear another word. She fled the bookstore, got into her car, and drove aimlessly for hours, the devastating scene replaying in her mind over and over. By the time she returned home, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long, haunting shadows across the lawn of the house she once thought was her safe haven. As she sat alone in the darkened living room, surrounded by the remnants of her once perfect life, something inside her shattered. The pain, the betrayal, the sheer weight of it all. In that darkness, a cold resolve took shape. Someone had to pay for this betrayal, and Sophia knew exactly who it would be. The events that led to the final confrontation unfolded over the course of several tense hours on that warm summer evening. Sophia, having spent the day drowning in grief and fury, found herself pacing the hallways of her home like a restless spirit. The ticking clock in the living room seemed to taunt her, marking the minutes until everything in her world would change forever. As twilight settled, David returned home. His usual confident stride was replaced with hesitant steps, as though he knew what awaited him. Sophia watched him from the shadows as he hung up his jacket and loosened his tie, the familiar routine now stained by the knowledge of his betrayal. David called out her name, his voice tinged with anxiety. When she finally stepped into view, he visibly recoiled. The woman standing before him was nothing like the vibrant, loving wife he had once known. Sophia's eyes were bloodshot and hollow, her posture stiff with barely suppressed rage. David, his face twisted with guilt and desperation, launched into a flurry of excuses and apologies. He talked about feeling neglected, about the stress of work and the weight of their struggles. He insisted that the affair was a mistake, a lapse in judgment that spiraled out of control. But with every word he spoke, Sophia's anger grew, a storm of rage building within her. Before she knew what she was doing, Sophia found herself walking to David's study. She knew he kept a heavy decorative bookend there, an ornate piece he had picked up from a local shop. In a daze, she grabbed it, feeling its cold weight in her hands. When she returned to the living room, David's eyes widened in fear. He raised his hands, backing away slowly, his voice rising in panic as he promised to end the affair, to go to counseling, to do anything to save their marriage. But Sophia barely registered his word. All she could see was the image of David and Maggie, locked in that embrace, playing in an endless loop in her mind. What happened next was a blur of movement and chaos. David took a step forward, perhaps intending to stop her, But in the rush of heightened emotions, Sophia swung the heavy decorative bookend in her hand. The sickening thud as it connected with David's shoulder echoed through the room, followed by the sound of shattering glass as a framed photo fell from a nearby shelf. David stumbled backward, a look of shock and pain etched on his face. He clutched his shoulder where the impact had left a deep bruise, his white shirt now smeared with blood from a cut caused by the broken glass. Gasping for breath, David's eyes locked onto Sophia's, silently pleading for the woman he once knew. As the reality of what she had done set in, Sophia dropped the bookend. It hit the floor with a dull thud, snapping her out of her trance. Her fury melted away, replaced by sheer horror and regret. She rushed to David's side, her hands shaking as she tried to assess the wound she had inflicted. His breathing was labored, his face drained of color. Fighting back tears, Sophia fumbled for her phone and dialed the emergency number, her voice cracking as she gave the dispatcher the address, begging for an ambulance. While she waited for help, Sophia cradled David's head in her lap, murmuring a desperate mix of apologies and pleas for him to stay with her. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Neighbors, having heard the commotion, began gathering outside. Through the window, Sophia could see their concerned faces morph into expressions of shock as they realized what had happened. She overheard muffled conversations, someone mentioning the police. When the paramedics finally arrived, they moved swiftly to stabilize David. Sophia stood back, numb with disbelief, as they lifted him onto a stretcher and hurried him to the waiting ambulance. The wail of the sirens gradually faded, leaving her standing alone in the silent, tension-filled house, surrounded by the aftermath of her actions. It wasn't long before the police arrived. Detective Carla Reyes took charge of the scene, her sharp eyes scanning every detail as officers cordoned off the area and began collecting evidence. Approaching Sophia, who sat motionless on the stained couch, Detective Reyes spoke in a calm but firm voice, informing Sophia of her rights and asking if she understood what had just occurred. With a voice barely above a whisper, Sophia recounted the day's events, the devastating discovery of the affair, the confrontation, and the moment everything spiraled out of control. Her words were detached, as though she were recounting a story that had happened to someone else. As Sophia was led away and handcuffed, the enormity of the situation began to sink in. She caught glimpses of neighbors peering out from behind curtains, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. At the local hospital, David lay in critical condition, his injury far worse than it initially seemed. The blow had caused significant internal damage, and as he underwent surgery after surgery, friends and colleagues gathered in the waiting room, their whispered conversations filled with shock and speculation. Maggie, overcome with guilt and shame, tried to visit David, but was turned away by the hospital staff at his request. She retreated to her apartment above the bookstore, where she isolated herself, refusing to answer calls or see anyone. The weight of what she had caused left her looking years older, her once lively eyes now hollow and filled with sorrow. Detective Reyes dug deeper into the events that led up to that fateful night. She interviewed friends, colleagues, and family members, piecing together the tangled web of relationships and secrets that had unraveled so violently. The more she learned about the Chambers family's strained history and the affair between David and Maggie, the more complicated the case became. As the investigation moved forward, the town of Seabrook found itself divided. What initially seemed like a straightforward case of assault in a fit of rage was now viewed as a tragic consequence of betrayal and broken trust. Some residents felt sympathy for Sophia's situation, while others condemned her actions as unforgivable, no matter the circumstances. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence came from an unexpected source. Sophia's close friend and fellow chef, Lisa, stepped forward with a series of text messages. In the weeks leading up to the confrontation, Sophia had confided in Lisa about her growing suspicions, sharing the signs of infidelity she had noticed. The messages revealed Sophia's emotional turmoil and her struggle to accept the truth, providing valuable insight into her mental state leading up to the incident. Inside the packed courtroom, tension hung in the air as the judge called the proceedings to order. The prosecution, led by the ambitious District Attorney Vincent Harding, portrayed Sophia as a vengeful woman who had committed a premeditated act of violence. Harding argued that the assault was not a crime of passion, but a calculated attempt to punish both her husband and her mother for their betrayal. Sophia's defense attorney, Carla Morales, presented a different narrative. She painted Sophia as a victim of unbearable circumstances, a woman pushed to the edge by a betrayal that shattered her world. Morales emphasized Sophia's impeccable reputation, her dedication to her community, and the extreme emotional distress she had been under when she lashed out. In their closing statements, both sides made passionate appeals to the jury. Harding focused on the severity of the crime and the need for justice, while Morales urged the jury to consider the extraordinary situation and Sophia's otherwise exemplary life. As the jury left to deliberate, a hush fell over the courtroom. The fate of Sophia Reynolds now rested in their hands, and with it, the resolution of a tragedy that had rocked the quiet town of Seabrook. After 3 days of intense deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. They found Sophia Reynolds guilty of aggravated assault, a lesser charge than the attempted murder the prosecution sought. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of gasps and murmurs as the verdict was read, with Sophia standing quietly beside her attorney. The judge, considering Sophia's unblemished record and the extraordinary circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. Additionally, Sophia was required to undergo psychological counseling and complete an anger management program. The sentence drew mixed reactions. Some believed it was too lenient given the harm caused, while others felt it was a fair balance of justice and empathy. As Sophia was led away from the courtroom, the gravity of her actions and the long road ahead seemed to settle on her shoulder. David, having recovered from his injuries but forever changed by the experience, moved to a different state to start fresh. He and Sophia divorced during her incarceration, their communication limited to formal letters and rare phone calls. Despite the hurt and pain, there was a fragile sense of forgiveness between them, born of mutual understanding and regret. Maggie retreated from public life entirely. She lived in near isolation, only occasionally visited by a health aide. The burden of her role in the tragedy drained her vitality, leaving her a shadow of her former self. As Seabrook slowly healed and life moved forward, the story of Sophia, David, and Maggie became a sobering reminder of how quickly and irreversibly lives can unravel. It compels us to examine our own relationships, to value the trust we share with loved ones, and to reflect on the lasting consequences of the choices we make. Today, we delve into the tranquil surroundings of Monterey, California, a locale renowned for its breathtaking coastal views and rich cultural history. The community was shaken to its core when the body of a 21-year-old was discovered under troubling and mysterious circumstances. This is the story of a young groom, a 58-year-old wealthy art collector, and a marriage that ended in tragedy. Jack Thompson was a 21-year-old with a quiet disposition, born and raised in the picturesque town of Carmel by the Sea, just outside Monterey. Jack had recently completed his training as a chef in May 2022, known among his peers as the reserved one who was always experimenting with new recipes. While his friends were advancing in their culinary careers, Jack was still unsure of his path in the culinary world. He dreamed of one day owning his own restaurant, but he was uncertain about how to make his dreams a reality. Jack lived with his mother, Martha Thompson, in a modest home on the outskirts of town. Their financial situation was dire. Martha, a single mother, had struggled to keep them afloat, especially after a series of business failures left them in debt. The weight of their financial troubles bore heavily on Jack, who felt a strong obligation to support his mother. Despite his introverted nature, Jack was deeply compassionate, always willing to help others even as he faced his own challenges. In the week leading up to his untimely death, Jack found himself in an extraordinary situation. He had unexpectedly married Veronica Steele, a 58-year-old renowned art collector, known for her lavish lifestyle and multiple previous marriages. Veronica insisted on an extravagant wedding held at a stunning cliffside estate overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Big Sur. The event was opulent, with luxurious decorations, a gourmet menu, and a custom-made designer gown for Veronica. However, Jack appeared uncomfortable throughout the celebration. He looked anxious and unsure about the drastic turn his life had taken. The sudden announcement of his marriage to the much older Veronica Steele shocked everyone who knew him. Many speculated that his decision was influenced by his mother's financial difficulties, while others feared he might be under undue pressure. Jack's relationship with Veronica was strained not only by their significant age difference, but also by Veronica's controlling personality. She was notorious for her temper tantrums when things didn't go her way, leaving Jack increasingly overwhelmed by her behavior. He confided his worries and fears to his mother, but Martha urged him to stay in the marriage, believing it could secure their financial future. As a result, Jack felt trapped, caught between his mother's expectations and his growing discomfort with his new life. At the time of his death, Jack was still struggling to adjust to his changed circumstance. He had withdrawn from his friends and spent most of his time in the luxurious home he now shared with Veronica. His dream of becoming a successful chef seemed more out of reach than ever. He was a young man who had lost his direction, struggling to imagine a future that felt truly his own. On the morning of August 8, 2022, the peaceful atmosphere of Monterey was shattered by a disturbing discovery. At 8:30 a.m., Doris Miller, a 78-year-old neighbor, was on her regular morning walk when she noticed something strange at the cliffside estate of Veronica Steele Thompson. The curtains were tightly drawn, and the front door was slightly ajar. Doris, who had cherished the tranquility of the neighborhood for over 3 decades, found this unusual, especially since Veronica was known for her meticulous habits and always kept everything in perfect order. Driven by curiosity and concern, Doris decided to investigate. As she approached the house, she called out but received no reply. Hesitantly, she stepped inside and was immediately hit by a strong, acrid odor. It was then that she discovered Jack Thompson lying motionless on the living room floor. His body was slumped over the sofa, surrounded by several empty prescription bottles. A half-empty glass of water sat on the coffee table beside him. Doris stood frozen, her heart pounding. She knew Jack and could barely comprehend the scene in front of her. As tears welled up in her eyes, she quickly pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her voice trembling as she gave the address and described the grim scene. When the 911 operator asked her to check for signs of life, Doris hesitated but then cautiously approached Jack. She knelt beside him and gently shook his shoulder, calling his name. There was no response. His skin was pale, his lips faintly blue, and there were no signs of breathing. Doris's mind raced back to the wedding just a week earlier, where Jack had looked so out of place next to the much older Veronica in her extravagant bridal gown. She struggled to understand how everything had unraveled so quickly. With tears streaming down her face, Doris stayed on the line with the 911 operator until the police and paramedics arrived. The authorities soon confirmed Jack's death at the scene. Doris, shaken and heartbroken, was escorted outside, where she sat on the curb, staring blankly at the estate where Jack's promising life had met a tragic end. The police arrived at the Steele Thompson residence just before 9 a.m. on August 8, 2022. The investigation was led by Detective Michael Harris, a seasoned detective with the Monterey Police Department, known for his sharp intuition and straightforward approach. Detective Harris wasted no time in examining the scene. Accompanied by Officer Mark Davis, an eager young officer, they entered the home that had now become the center of a tragic mystery. The living room, where Jack's body was discovered, was eerily quiet. The elegant furniture and sophisticated decor stood in stark contrast to the lifeless figure on the floor. Detective Harris immediately noticed the scattered empty pill bottles and the glass of water on the coffee table. He examined the labels, prescriptions for medications like Xanax and OxyContin, drugs commonly associated with overdose cases. The scene was unnervingly orderly. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood. The extreme tidiness suggested that whatever had happened wasn't a chaotic, spur-of-the-moment event, but something much more deliberate. Detective Harris instructed Officer Davis to begin photographing the scene, while he called in a forensics team to dust for fingerprints and gather evidence. The medical examiner, Dr. Evelyn Hahn, arrived shortly thereafter to examine the body. She confirmed that Jack had likely died from an overdose, but the amount of drugs present, far above therapeutic levels, indicated that it wasn't accidental. As they dug deeper into the investigation, Detective Harris's attention was drawn to a small but telling detail, a wedding photograph of Jack and Veronica on the mantel. In the photo, Jack's expression was subdued, his eyes downcast, a stark contrast to Veronica's bright, confident smile. This subtle detail suggested that everything was not as harmonious in this newly united household as it appeared. The forensic team meticulously collected the pill bottles, the glass of water, and any other pertinent evidence. They also detected a faint scent of perfume in the air, which Detective Harris recognized as Veronica's signature fragrance, a high-end scent from Chanel No. 5. By the time the initial examination was complete, Detective Harris was increasingly convinced that this case was more than just an overdose. The evidence pointed to foul play, and the investigation was just beginning. As they delved further into Jack Thompson's death, suspicion naturally fell on the most likely suspect, Veronica Steele Thompson, Jack's 58-year-old wife. Veronica was a well-known figure in Monterey, famous for her lavish lifestyle and domineering personality. Coming from a wealthy background, Veronica had been through multiple marriages, each ending in bitterness. Known for her obsession with preserving her youth and her tendency to lash out when things didn't go her way, Veronica's demanding nature had earned her a reputation for perfectionism. When Detective Harris and Officer Davis visited Veronica's home later that day, they found her lounging nonchalantly by the pool, just yards from where her husband had died, casually sipping a mimosa and flipping through the latest issue of Vogue. Despite the grim circumstances, Veronica appeared disturbingly composed. Dressed in a stylish kaftan and oversized sunglasses, she exuded a detached air that immediately caught Detective Harris's attention. Veronica greeted the officers with a superficial smile that didn't reach her eyes. When questioned about the events leading up to Jack's death, she explained that she had gone to bed early the previous night, leaving Jack in the living room to work on some new recipes. She assumed he had fallen asleep on the couch when she didn't find him in their bed the next morning. Upon hearing of his death, her reaction was muted, showing only a mild expression of sorrow, as if she had learned of a distant acquaintance's passing. During the interrogation, Veronica's story remained consistent, but her emotional detachment raised suspicions. She cooperated with the investigators but kept a certain distance, responding with practiced precision. When asked about the medications found at the scene, Veronica mentioned that Jack had been struggling recently and had prescriptions to help with his mental well-being. She claimed to be unaware of any potential for overdose, suggesting that perhaps Jack had taken more pills than intended in a moment of despair. Despite her composed facade, Detective Harris noted several inconsistencies in Veronica's account. For instance, Veronica had claimed that Jack was working on his recipes, yet the TV, which he often used to watch cooking shows for inspiration, was off when Doris Miller found the body. Moreover, the bed in the master bedroom appeared untouched, suggesting that Veronica may not have gone to bed at all. The more Detective Harris examined her statements, the clearer it became that Veronica was hiding something. However, without concrete evidence, the police couldn't detain her. Veronica's alibi seemed airtight, but her demeanor cast a shadow of doubt. As the interrogation concluded, Detective Harris remained uneasy, suspecting that Veronica, with her elegant and confident exterior, was more deeply involved in Jack's death than she was letting on. With Veronica Steele Thompson still under scrutiny, the focus shifted to a second suspect, Martha Thompson, Jack's mother. Martha, at 49, had faced a lifetime of hardships. Her life was marked by poor choices, each seemingly worse than the last. Overwhelmed by crippling debt, Martha had turned to selling prescription drugs in secret, a fact known to only a few. Detective Harris, aware of Martha's past arrests, considered how her dire financial situation might have driven her to push Jack into his ill-fated marriage with Veronica. The union promised financial salvation, too tempting for Martha to ignore. When brought in for questioning, Martha appeared disheveled and anxious. Dressed in faded jeans and a worn t-shirt, she was a stark contrast to Veronica's polished appearance. Martha's hands trembled as she lit a cigarette, a habit she had recently picked up again, and her voice quivered as she answered questions. She admitted to encouraging Jack's marriage to Veronica, describing it as an opportunity too good to pass up. She recalled the wedding at the Grand Big Sur estate, where Jack had looked distinctly uncomfortable amidst the extravagance. Martha insisted she only wanted what was best for her son, that Veronica could provide the financial stability she had failed to achieve herself. However, when the conversation turned to the medications found at the scene, Martha became defensive. She denied any knowledge of the large quantity of pills, claiming that Jack must have obtained them on his own. Yet Detective Harris wasn't convinced. Martha's financial troubles, her illegal drug activities, and her desperation to secure a better future all pointed to her involvement. During the interrogation,
Martha's responses grew increasingly inconsistent. She initially claimed she hadn't seen Jack for days, but later contradicted herself by saying she had visited him the night before his death. Her agitation and conflicting statements only deepened the police's suspicion. Despite her denials, Martha's connection to the drugs and her apparent motive to maintain Jack's marriage positioned her as a key suspect. Detective Harris knew that Martha was resourceful, determined, and willing to do whatever it took to protect herself, even if it meant putting her own son at risk. As the interrogation concluded, they were getting closer to the truth, but there were still missing pieces to the puzzle. With both Veronica Steele Thompson and Martha Thompson under investigation, attention turned to a third suspect, Harold Monroe, Veronica's ex-husband. At 70 years old, Harold was a successful real estate mogul known for his ruthless tactics in both business and personal matters. His latest venture involved launching a series of luxury developments along the California coast, a project that had significantly bolstered his financial standing. Harold's marriage to Veronica had ended bitterly just months before she married Jack, and their divorce had become a hot topic in local social circles. Veronica had walked away with a substantial portion of Harold's wealth, which had deeply humiliated and angered him. Jack's sudden marriage to Veronica, a much younger man she had recently met, felt like a direct insult. Harold's lingering resentment and envy made him a key suspect in the ongoing investigation. Detective Harris and Officer Davis decided to question Harold. When they arrived at his sprawling estate, they found him in his study, surrounded by blueprints and real estate contracts. Harold greeted them with a firm handshake, exuding an air of calm and confidence. Unlike Martha, who had appeared nervous and unsettled, Harold was composed and seemed almost prepared for their questions. During the interrogation, Harold was cooperative but carefully measured in his response. He admitted his frustration over Veronica's remarriage, describing it as a deep betrayal. However, he denied any involvement in Jack's death. Harold explained that he had been focused on his business ventures and had kept minimal contact with Veronica or Jack since the divorce. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of Jack's death, Harold provided a strong alibi. He had been attending a real estate gala in San Francisco, with numerous prominent individuals able to vouch for his presence, making it difficult for the police to challenge his alibi. Despite his cooperative demeanor, Detective Harris remained suspicious. Harold's overly composed calm felt almost rehearsed, as if he had anticipated their line of questioning. His recent heated exchange with Veronica, witnessed during a high-profile charity event where Harold had ominously warned her that she would regret their divorce, only deepened their suspicions. Although there wasn't enough evidence to detain Harold, his potential motives of jealousy and revenge kept him firmly in the investigative spotlight. The investigation was far from over, and Detective Harris realized they needed to dig deeper to uncover the full truth. On August 15, 2022, just as the case seemed to be hitting a dead end, a crucial new piece of evidence surfaced. It was a mild, sunny afternoon, with clouds beginning to gather over Monterey. Detective Michael Harris was at the station reviewing the case files when Officer Mark Davis rushed in, holding a sealed envelope. It had arrived anonymously at the station that morning, immediately raising suspicion. Inside the envelope was a USB drive. The contents of the drive were shocking. A series of text messages between Veronica Steele Thompson and an unidentified contact, dated just days before Jack's death. The messages outlined Veronica's plan to divorce Jack and disinherit him, using her knowledge of Martha Thompson's illegal drug activities as leverage. The messages revealed Veronica's dissatisfaction with Jack's subdued personality and his lackluster efforts in the kitchen as her spouse, along with her growing eagerness to free herself from the marriage. His cooking is so uninspired, one message read. His plating skills are worse than a novice's, another harsh text declared. If that bleep Martha thinks she can control this bleep, she's gravely mistaken. I'll make sure she and that mediocre bleep chef pay. These texts provided deep insight into Veronica's mindset and intentions. It became clear that she was scheming to rid herself of both Jack and Martha. The messages also hinted at the involvement of a third party, a private investigator Veronica had hired to dig up dirt on Martha's involvement in the illegal drug trade. This investigator had uncovered Martha's history of drug trafficking and was feeding Veronica the information she needed to execute her plan. This revelation painted Veronica as a calculating and vindictive individual, determined to achieve her goals by any means necessary. It also raised significant questions about Martha's role in Jack's death.
death? Was Martha aware of Veronica's plot and acted out of desperation? Or was she merely an unwitting pawn in Veronica's elaborate scheme? Armed with this compelling evidence, the police ramped up their investigation into both Veronica and Martha. The case gained renewed momentum as it became evident that the truth was more complex than initially thought. The pieces were slowly falling into place, but the full story was still unfolding. On August 20th, 2022, as the investigation reached a critical point, Detective Michael Harris received a breakthrough after analyzing the text messages found on the USB drive and cross-referencing them with phone records. It became clear that Martha Thompson, Jack's own mother, was behind the deadly scheme. Driven by desperation and greed, Martha had used her son as a pawn in her plot. The police now had enough evidence to arrest her. Martha Thompson, 49, was a woman who saw life as a relentless struggle, burdened by debt and haunted by poor decisions. Martha viewed Jack's marriage to Veronica as her ticket out of financial ruin. She feared that Jack, who had shown little interest in women before, would leave Veronica, shattering Martha's hopes for a steady stream of money. To ensure that wouldn't happen, Martha had been secretly giving Jack prescription drugs and sexual enhancers to keep him compliant and performing, but her plan went terribly wrong when Jack accidentally overdosed, taking far more than she had intended. The twist came when it was revealed that Veronica, unsatisfied with Jack's lack of enthusiasm as a husband, had been planning to divorce him and cut both him and Martha out of her life. She had discovered Martha's drug dealings and intended to use that information to keep them out of her money. But Martha, desperate to keep the marriage intact, took matters into her own hands on the night of Jack's death. Martha had given him a stronger dose of the drugs, hoping to calm him down. But Jack, distraught over his loveless marriage and fearful of Veronica's harshness, took even more pills on his own, leading to a fatal overdose. Martha hadn't meant to kill her son, but her actions directly caused his death. When the police confronted Martha with the evidence, she initially denied everything. Her demeanor was panicked and frantic, a stark contrast to her earlier calm. But as Detective Harris laid out the incriminating messages and phone records, Martha's defenses crumbled. She claimed she never intended to kill her son, only to keep him in the marriage until they could secure their financial future. Martha's arrest sent shockwaves through the small community of Monterey. Jack's family was devastated by the revelation that his own mother had caused his death. The community, already shaken by the bizarre circumstances of the marriage, now had to come to terms with the tragic reality that greed and desperation had led to such a senseless loss. As Martha was led away in handcuffs, she appeared numb, unable to fully grasp the gravity of her actions. The community, overwhelmed by grief, expressed their sorrow and disbelief, struggling to accept what had happened. The arrest marked the end of a dark chapter in Monterey's history, but the pain and shock would linger for a long time. Martha Thompson's trial began in early December 2022. The courtroom was packed with reporters from outlets like the Monterey Gazette and True Crime Daily, eager to cover the shocking details of the case. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Mark Christensen, portrayed Martha as a manipulative and desperate woman who had prioritized her financial needs over her son's life. Christensen, known for his sharp intellect and relentless pursuit of justice, argued that Martha's actions were premeditated and driven by greed. He pointed to the text messages, phone records, and Martha's own confession as undeniable proof of her guilt. The defense, led by public defender Carita Vasquez, countered by portraying Martha as a troubled mother who had made a terrible mistake. Vasquez, a seasoned attorney known for her compassion, argued that Martha never intended to kill Jack. She emphasized Martha's financial struggles, her desperation to secure a better future for her family, and the fact that Jack's death was accidental. Vasquez appealed to the jury's sympathy, asking them to consider Martha's difficult circumstances and the pressure she was under. Throughout the trial, Jack's family watched in agony. Martha's actions had torn their family apart, and the pain was clear in their tearful expressions. The prosecution's case was strong, but the defense's argument for leniency resonated with some jurors. On December 15, 2022, the jury delivered their verdict. Martha Thompson was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The jury believed that while Martha's actions had led to Jack's death, there wasn't enough evidence to prove that she had intended to kill him. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, with Martha showing little reaction, her face pale and expressionless. The judge sentenced Martha to 10 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions. Some felt it was too lenient, given the tragic loss of Jack's life, while others believed it was fair considering Martha's desperate circumstances. For Jack's family, the verdict brought little comfort. They were left to grapple with the reality that their loved one was gone, taken by the very person who was supposed to protect him. The town of Monterey, too, was left to process the disturbing events that had unfolded in their midst, a stark reminder of how greed and desperation can lead to unthinkable actions. In the months following Martha Thompson's sentencing, the impact of the case continued to resonate deeply within the Monterey community. The trial had left a lasting mark on everyone involved, from the Thompson family to local residents. Martha Thompson was sent to the California State Prison Complex in Sacramento, a high-security facility located near the capital. In prison, Martha faced a challenging environment. Her case had received significant media attention, and she was often the subject of gossip and judgment from fellow inmates. The prison system offered her limited opportunities for rehabilitation and support, leaving her to reflect on the tragic consequences of her actions. Martha spent her time participating in prison programs aimed at addressing substance abuse and mental health issues, hoping to find some sense of redemption and prepare for her eventual release. Despite the turmoil, life in Monterey gradually returned to normal. The town held a memorial for Jack at a local park, attended by friends, family, and residents who wished to honor his memory. The event featured live music and speeches celebrating Jack's life and dreams. It was a somber reminder of the young man whose life was cut short, and it offered the community a chance to come together and support one another. As for the media coverage of the case, it eventually faded, making way for new stories and developments. However, the impact of Jack's death and the subsequent trial continued to serve as a poignant reminder of the consequences of desperation and greed, affecting everyone who had been touched by the tragic events of August 2022. At the heart of the story are 3 lives destined to intertwine. Daniel, a 22-year-old photographer whose charm is both captivating and dangerous. Eleanor Bennett, an architect longing for a deeper connection. And Clara Matthews, a recent widow striving to regain her confidence. Their intertwined fates lead to an unexpected act of violence that reshapes their peaceful coastal town, forcing everyone to reevaluate their understanding of their neighbors. Daniel, at 22, carried himself with a maturity beyond his years. His striking 6-foot frame and easy smile turned heads wherever he went. But it wasn't just his looks that made him stand out. Daniel had a charisma that made everyone feel uniquely seen. Raised by a retired Army officer, Daniel learned independence early, picking up the discipline and observational skills that made him an exceptional photographer. He could capture moments that others might miss, which quickly made him popular in Willowbrook, where he had set up his own small photography studio. After completing high school, Daniel moved to Willowbrook, seeking both inspiration and independence. His father's old friend offered him a place to stay, giving him the freedom to explore his artistic ambitions without the pressure of immediate success. The locals quickly took notice of the new arrival. People of all ages found reasons to interact with him, drawn to his engaging personality and infectious enthusiasm. It was his neighbors, however, who would set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. Living on one side was Eleanor Bennett, whose life seemed perfect from the outside: successful career, beautiful home, and a respected husband. On the other side was Clara Matthews, a woman in her mid-40s, trying to rebuild her life after a devastating loss. Daniel's first significant encounter in Willowbrook occurred on a sunny morning, as he was capturing shots of the town's picturesque community garden. Eleanor Bennett approached, offering him a cup of freshly brewed coffee as a welcoming gesture. Their connection was instant, marking the beginning of a transformative journey for both. Eleanor appeared to lead an enviable life, a successful architect, a stunning home, and admiration from her peers. Yet, behind the polished exterior, her life was far from perfect. Married to Martin, a real estate developer whose career often kept him away, Eleanor felt their emotional connection fading after 15 years of marriage. Once full of dreams and creative energy, particularly in her writing, Eleanor now found her passions sidelined, her unfinished manuscripts gathering dust as her husband's career took precedence. The moment Eleanor met Daniel, an old spark was reignited. His fresh outlook and genuine interest in her stories rekindled her spirit. She found herself gravitating toward his studio whenever she could, her days brightened by each interaction. What began as casual conversations about art and architecture soon delved deeper. Daniel's enthusiasm for her writing reignited Eleanor's long-dormant passion, leading her back to the manuscripts that had once been her creative refuge. One evening, as Martin was tied up with yet another late meeting, Eleanor invited Daniel over to share some of her old manuscripts. In the quiet of her home office, surrounded by stacks of paper filled with the stories of her abandoned dreams, a palpable shift occurred. Daniel's hand brushed against hers as they flipped through the pages, sending a jolt of emotion through Eleanor. She turned to face him, her heart pounding. Daniel's gaze was curious, stirring feelings that had long been buried. Years of emotional neglect had led to this moment, a desperate yearning for genuine connection. Eleanor leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that was transformative. As she pulled back, the intensity of her emotions left her breathless and conflicted, but the spark Daniel had ignited was too powerful to ignore. Clara Matthews, at 45, was forging a new path. After the unexpected death of her husband, she had summoned the courage to reshape her solitary life. The loss had become final just a few months before Daniel moved in next door, leaving Clara emotionally vulnerable. Once vibrant and confident, prolonged grief had eroded her self-esteem. She doubted even the simplest decisions, from what to wear to how to manage her yoga studio. The tragedy had strained her finances and spirit, forcing her to move from the grandeur of her former home to a modest cottage in Willowbrook. Clara's initial meeting with Daniel took place on a blustery afternoon as she struggled with groceries outside her house. Without hesitation, Daniel stepped in to help, his warm smile giving her a sense of visibility she hadn't felt in years. As they put away the groceries, Clara found herself sharing details of her recent hardships, exchange stories, and share laughter that felt both invigorating and forbidden. The bustling setting offered the perfect camouflage, enabling them to merge with other patrons without attracting notice. However, the happiness these moments brought her was tinged with guilt. Sophie, ever perceptive to the moods around her, started sensing that something was amiss. Though she couldn't pinpoint what it was, a sense of disquiet troubled her. Isabel's demeanor had shifted, her smile seemed contrived, and she often seemed preoccupied during family meals. Occasionally, Isabel would excuse herself to answer phone calls, returning with an anxious expression. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that her mother was concealing something, yet she lacked the experience in adult relationships to address it. Meanwhile, Michael remained oblivious to the mounting tension within his family. He stayed committed to his work, convinced that his provision was vital for their happiness. He often returned home drained, seeking comfort in the regularity of household life. His conversations with Isabel had shortened to concise and functional exchanges, which he attributed to her job stress rather than any underlying troubles. Michael frequently attempted to initiate discussions about household projects or future endeavors, but Isabel's aloof and distracted replies only added to his growing sense of frustration and bewilderment. They crafted detailed schemes to dodge any suspicions. Isabel often claimed she had late shifts at the police department or needed to stay for overtime, while Ethan would explain he was prepping for exams or putting in extra hours at the restaurant. Each meeting, veiled in secrecy, not only thrilled them but also intensified Isabel's internal struggle. She was aware she was straying from her commitments, yet the emotional bond with Ethan was overwhelmingly compelling. He made her feel cherished, valuable, and acknowledged, sensations that had become scarce in her life with Michael. One afternoon, while strolling through Portland's Forest Park, Isabel stopped on a hidden path to catch her breath. The air was brisk and the scent of the forest enveloped them. Ethan, vibrant and full of life, enthusiastically shared a tale from his youth. Listening to him, Isabel felt a wave of affection wash over her, shadowed by the stark reality of their situation. She pondered whether this new connection was worth the risks. Despite knowing the precariousness of their liaison, the enchantment of their shared moments was too tempting to forsake. Sophie's doubts kept mounting. She observed her mother intently, trying to decipher the shifts in her demeanor. The connection they once cherished now seemed compromised, and Sophie contemplated whether to address her concerns with Isabel. She thought about broaching the subject several times, but the fear of unsettling revelations deterred her. She hesitated to distress her mother, especially if her suspicions proved baseless. Michael remained blissfully unaware, immersing himself in his work and home responsibilities. Always the guardian and provider, The notion that his wife might be discontented or concealing something never entered his thoughts. For him, life appeared normal. Although he recognized an emotional distance, he dismissed it as a temporary phase. One afternoon, Sophie returned home early from classes, eager to surprise her mother with her favorite dish. Entering the house, she was met with an eerie quietness. The typical sounds of their family life were missing. No laughter, no sounds of television. After calling out for Isabel and receiving no reply, Sophie felt compelled to check her mother's bedroom. What she discovered there devastated her. Isabel's phone lay on the bed, its screen illuminated, displaying a sequence of text messages that were clearly meant to be private. Sophie's pulse raced as she picked up the phone, her hands shaking with both dread and resolve. She scrolled through the messages, each one confirming her gravest fears. The exchanges between Isabel and Ethan were rife with flirtation, yearning, and plans for future rendezvous. There was evident an emotional affair was underway. The realization made Sophie's heart plummet. Betrayal struck her profoundly, leaving her breathless. The thought that her mother, the woman she had revered, could engage in such deceit was unfathomable. A whirlwind of emotions, anger, sorrow, confusion, surged through her, overwhelming her senses and clouding her judgment. Sophie dropped the phone onto the bed, her mind swirling with turmoil. She felt shattered and betrayed, unable to reconcile the loving mother she had always known with the woman who had been sneaking around behind her back. Her anger surged as she realized her own boyfriend, Ethan, had been part of this betrayal. How could he do this to her? The man she trusted was now involved in her mother's infidelity. Later that evening, when Ethan came over to see Sophie, she didn't hesitate. They were in the living room, the same space where they had shared countless laughs and quiet moments. Now it felt like a battlefield. "Ethan," she said, her voice cold and firm, "we need to talk." Ethan looked confused. "What's wrong, Sophie? You seem upset." "Upset? That's an understatement. I found something today that changes everything." "What do you mean?" His face shifted to concern, but Sophie noticed a flicker of guilt. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I found texts on my mom's phone, texts between you and her. You both knew exactly." While helping Eleanor carry groceries, he narrowly escaped being seen by Clara. He ducked behind a car, pretending to retrieve a dropped item, his heart racing with the near miss. Each close call highlighted the precarious nature of his secret life, leaving him shaken by how easily everything could fall apart. As Eleanor and Clara grew more attached, they began to demand more of Daniel's time and attention. Eleanor, revitalized by her rediscovered passion for writing, started discussing the possibility of leaving her husband. She envisioned a future with Daniel, filled with love and creative collaborations, and painted this dream vividly during their meetings. These conversations left Daniel both excited and terrified, unsure of how to respond to such intense declarations, especially given their age differences. Clara, more cautious about rushing into a new relationship, subtly brought Daniel closer into her life. She introduced him to her friends as the thoughtful young neighbor, but their affectionate exchanges and knowing glances revealed much more. She even hinted at holiday plans, suggesting that Daniel might meet her family during the festive season. The increasing expectations from both women compounded the complexity of Daniel's already precarious situation. He found himself trapped in conflicting commitments, agreeing to holiday engagements with both Eleanor and Clara, fully aware that he would inevitably disappoint one or both of them. As the pressure mounted, the toll on Daniel became evident. He lost weight, endured sleepless nights filled with anxiety, and developed a habit of nervously checking his phone and looking over his shoulder. He knew he needed to end one of the relationships, but was paralyzed by the thought of causing pain to either woman. Unbeknownst to him, his erratic behavior did not go unnoticed. Both Eleanor and Clara, initially blinded by their emotions, began to sense that something was wrong. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the fragile balance Daniel had struggled to maintain. The carefully constructed facade Daniel had upheld unraveled dramatically on a crisp autumn evening at Willowbrook's annual festival. With the town square bustling with festivities, Daniel hesitated about attending, knowing that both Eleanor and Clara would be there. Ultimately, he decided that not showing up would arouse more suspicion than being present. As he mingled among the townspeople, he felt as though he were navigating a minefield, exchanging pleasantries while anxiously scanning the crowd for signs of Eleanor or Clara. Just as he began to relax, thinking he might avoid any drama, fate intervened. Eleanor, who was assisting at the bookstall, caught sight of Daniel and beckoned him over with a bright smile. As he approached, hesitantly, He noticed Clara at a nearby booth, arranging items for an art auction. Time seemed to slow as Daniel watched both women, unaware of each other's significance in his life, drawing closer to an unavoidable confrontation. Eleanor reached him first, her embrace lingering longer than a simple neighborly gesture. As she stepped back, her eyes glowing with affection, Clara joined them. Daniel's heart sank as he saw the puzzled and slowly dawning realization on their faces. A tense silence enveloped the trio, broken only when Eleanor, ever the gracious architect, extended her hand to Clara. Introducing herself, Clara responded in kind, her gaze shifting between Daniel and Eleanor, noticing the too familiar touch that lingered on Daniel's arm. The ensuing conversation became an intricate dance of innuendo and subtle implication. Both women, drawing on their instincts and the hints they had previously overlooked, began to piece together the reality of their shared connection with Daniel. Caught in the middle, Daniel was paralyzed, unable to offer any defense. His silence only deepened the growing suspicions of both women, sealing the fate of his double life. The tension reached its breaking point when Eleanor, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion, pointed out a distinctive manuscript she had written specifically for Daniel, a story he had carelessly left behind. In that moment, the full extent of Daniel's deceit was exposed to both women. Eleanor's face crumpled, tears welling up, while Clara's expression hardened into one of icy indignation. Without a word, they both turned and walked away, leaving Daniel alone, the weight of his actions crashing down around him. The repercussions were swift and brutal. As Eleanor and Clara departed in opposite directions, whispers spread among the festival goers. Onlookers who had witnessed their charged confrontation began to speculate, and soon rumors rippled through Willowbrook. Daniel, reeling from the sudden exposure of his deceit, fled the event. That night, he paced restlessly, alternating between frantic attempts to contact both women
to Ethan's grieving family.
Tried to portray Isabella Ruiz as a frail old woman who could not possibly have orchestrated such a crime. Randall painted Lina Castillo as the true mastermind, claiming that Isabella had been manipulated into covering up for her daughter-in-law. However, Isabella's stern demeanor on the stand did little to win the jury's sympathy, and they were clearly disturbed by the sordid details of the case. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. Isabella Ruiz was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lina Castillo, though charged as an accessory to murder, received a lighter sentence of 25 years after cooperating with investigators. The verdict brought some relief to Victor's family, but the damage left behind by the shocking betrayal would never fully heal. Many felt that justice had been served, but Victor's tragic death and the circumstances surrounding it left a dark cloud over the Ruiz family for years to come. After the trial, life changed drastically for everyone involved. Isabella Ruiz, the mother convicted of murdering her son, was sent to a state prison in California. Despite her sharp wit and strong personality, life behind bars proved challenging. Isabella tried to maintain her dignity, but the isolation and stigma of her crime weighed heavily on her. In prison, she was often the target of gossip and disdain from other inmates. Over the years, Isabella's health began to decline, and in 2021 she contracted COVID-19 during a surge in cases. Despite efforts to treat her, she passed away alone in a prison hospital. News of her death made headlines, with some former friends and family expressing mixed feelings about her fate. Lina Castillo, Victor's widow, faced a different kind of consequence after her reduced sentence of 25 years. She served her time in a women's correctional facility, often reminiscing about her life before the murder. During her incarceration, she sought therapy to deal with her feelings of guilt and confusion about her relationships. Lina maintained her innocence regarding the actual murder but acknowledged her role in the events that unfolded. Amy Liu, the young yoga instructor who had become entangled in the scandal, also faced her own struggles. Though Amy was never charged with any crime, the fallout from the trial affected her reputation. She continued to work at the resort for a few years after the events, but the whispers of the affair haunted her. In search of a fresh start, Amy eventually moved to Los Angeles, California, where she enrolled in college.
Clara joined them. Daniel's heart sank as he saw the puzzled and slowly dawning realization on their faces. A tense silence enveloped the trio, broken only when Eleanor, ever the gracious architect, extended her hand to Clara. Introducing herself, Clara responded in kind, her gaze shifting between Daniel and Eleanor, noticing the too familiar touch that lingered on Daniel's arm. The ensuing conversation became an intricate dance of innuendo and subtle implication. Both women, drawing on their instincts and the hints they had previously overlooked, began to piece together the reality of their shared connection with Daniel. Caught in the middle, Daniel was paralyzed, unable to offer any defense. His silence only deepened the growing suspicions of both women, sealing the fate of his double life. The tension reached its breaking point when Eleanor, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion, pointed out a distinctive manuscript she had written specifically for Daniel, a story he had carelessly left behind. In that moment, the full extent of Daniel's deceit was exposed to both women. Eleanor's face crumpled, tears
He grappled not only with the public scandal of his wife's betrayal, but also the shock of her drastic actions. He withdrew from his public life, taking a leave of absence from his real estate business. The inquiry also highlighted Eleanor's significant emotional turmoil leading up to the incident. Neighbors and acquaintances, who had previously been hesitant to get involved, came forward with observations of her increasingly unstable behavior and mental distress. These accounts became crucial in shaping her legal defense. Clara Matthews's relatives, shocked and grief-stricken, traveled from afar to cope with their loss. The investigation also scrutinized the firearm involved. Legally registered to Martin, the gun had been carelessly stored, raising legal questions about his responsibility in the tragedy, further complicating an already intricate legal case. The trial of Eleanor Bennett began 6 months after the incident. Prosecutors portrayed her as a calculating murderer, driven by jealousy, citing her premeditated retrieval of the firearm and her deteriorating mental state as evidence of her intent. In contrast, the defense argued that Eleanor was a victim of her circumstances, pushed to the brink by emotional betrayal and overwhelming stress. They called upon experts to testify about how prolonged emotional distress could impair judgment. Daniel's testimony was a pivotal moment in the trial. His detailed account of the relationships and events leading up to the shooting provided essential context, though his time on the stand was visibly distressing for everyone involved. After extensive testimonies and careful deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Eleanor was found guilty of second-degree murder, a verdict less severe than what the prosecution had sought. The judge, taking into account the unique circumstances and Eleanor's previously clean record, sentenced her to 18 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 12 years. In the years that followed, the residents of Willowbrook struggled to recover from the upheaval. The community, once a symbol of peace and neighborly unity, now bore the scars of the tragedy. The events of that chilling November day remained a somber reminder that even in the most seemingly idyllic neighborhoods, deep-seated emotions and turmoil can lead to catastrophic outcomes. In the heart of a lively London neighborhood, a respected teacher, adored by her community for her seemingly perfect life, hides a dark secret. Her manipulative affair with her father-in-law triggers a series of events that lead to murder. This is the story of Emily Peterson, a woman whose obsession with control and independence spirals into a deadly tragedy that shocks everyone around her. Emily Peterson, 36, seemed to live a life many envied. She had the image of a dedicated teacher, actively involved in every school and community event. People often admired her devotion to her family, especially to her husband Thomas, who worked tirelessly managing his chain of flower shops. While Thomas focused on expanding the business, Emily stayed at home, raising their children, Lily and Max, instilling values of responsibility and kindness in them. During this time, George Williams, Thomas's father, now 65, had retired from the business to enjoy his free time. Once a successful businessman, George was known for his wisdom and insights, frequently attending local events and offering advice to younger generations in the area. After losing his wife, George became more reclusive, though he still maintained a strong presence in the community. Emily admired George from afar, viewing him as a source of strength and stability. However, by 2010, her marriage to Thomas had grown distant. Thomas's focus on the flower shops consumed all his energy. He left early in the morning and returned late at night, always exhausted. Their conversations had dwindled to brief exchanges about bills and the children. The warmth they once shared had faded, leaving Emily feeling isolated, unappreciated, and emotionally neglected. In those lonely moments, Emily turned to George. At first, their interactions were innocent, casual chats after neighborhood events or quick conversations at family gatherings, but gradually their discussions grew deeper. By early 2011, Emily and George had become closer. With Thomas constantly busy, George frequently visited the house, filling in roles Thomas couldn't. Emily appreciated how George always made time for her. Unlike her husband, George listened to her frustrations, sympathized with her struggles, and offered comforting words. George, still grieving his late wife, found solace in Emily's company. He had never fully recovered from his wife's passing in 2009, and though he remained composed, the pain lingered. He saw in Emily a kindred spirit, someone suffering in silence as he was. Their conversations often revolved around their personal difficulties, with George confiding in Emily about how empty his house felt since his wife passed away. Emily, in return, shared how abandoned she felt in her marriage,
explaining how Thomas no longer noticed or appreciated her. This shared vulnerability forged a deep emotional bond between them. By mid-2011, George began visiting more often, offering to help around the house or spend time with the children. But both of them knew something was changing. The lines between father-in-law and daughter-in-law blurred. Emily, who had always been seen as a devoted wife, began to enjoy the power she had over George. She could see the effect she had on him, how his demeanor softened whenever they were alone. Gradually, Emily began to manipulate the situation, carefully playing into George's emotions while keeping up her image as the devoted daughter-in-law. She would talk about how much she missed having a partner who truly cared for her, knowing that George, in his vulnerability, would fall into that role. She frequently brought up topics of loss and loneliness, aware that George's emotional fragility would keep him conflicted. By the end of 2011, their relationship had crossed from emotional to physical, though it remained hidden beneath layers of secrecy and guilt. George, torn between his grief and his deepening attachment to Emily, wrestled with the affair. Emily, on the other hand, faced no such struggle. For her, the affair was all about control. She relished the power she wielded over George, a man once considered untouchable in the community. It wasn't love driving her actions, but a calculated thirst for something more. She had grown weary of being the dutiful wife, living in Thomas's shadow. George, with his influence and wealth, became her means to an end. Everything took a dark turn on March 6, 2014, when the police were called to the Peterson residence. Thomas's body was found in the greenhouse, his head brutally struck with a heavy object. What had once been a peaceful retreat where Thomas indulged his love for plants had turned into a crime scene. Blood splattered across the floor, leaving the community reeling in shock. Looking back at early 2012, when their meetings became more frequent and their conversations darker, George, consumed with guilt, often spoke of ending the relationship, citing fear of the consequences. But Emily always convinced him otherwise, using her emotional grip to keep him close. She reminded him of how lonely they both were, how Thomas's neglect of her was unjust, and how they deserved happiness, even if it came at a price. By this point, George was too entrenched in the affair to break free. Emily's manipulation grew more cunning as time passed. She subtly began planting the idea that Thomas's absence would not only be a relief but a necessity. She hinted at how much simpler life would be without Thomas's constant focus on the business, without him always being in the way. George, emotionally drained and fragile, started to agree. He began seeing Thomas not as his son but as an obstacle to the life he and Emily could share. By mid-2013, Emily had gained complete control over George. He was willing to do anything to keep her in his life, even if it meant betraying his own family. But Emily was already looking ahead. She saw a chance to not only free herself from her marriage but also take over the family business. George was aging, and she knew it wouldn't be long before control of the flower shops passed to her. But first, Thomas had to go. As their affair deepened, so did Emily's schemes. By January 2014, she had begun carefully setting the stage for Thomas's demise. She was patient, calculating, and knew her moment was coming. What had started as a secret affair had turned into a dangerous game of manipulation, with George as her pawn and Thomas as her target. On March 2, 2014, everything began to unravel in the Peterson household. What had been quietly brewing for years behind closed doors finally reached its breaking point. Emily, always in control, decided it was time to act. She knew she could no longer uphold the charade of her life. Her affair with George had become more than just a secret. It was now a tangled web of lies and manipulation, threatening to come crashing down. George, weighed down with guilt, hesitated. The gravity of his actions overwhelmed him, and the thought of committing an even greater sin, the murder of his own son, paralyzed him with fear. But Emily was relentless. She had spent years mastering the art of manipulating George, exploiting his weaknesses. She knew exactly how to push George just enough to get what she wanted without scaring him off. Emily framed their situation in a way that allowed him to justify the unthinkable. George, torn between his feelings for Emily and the moral values he once held dear, felt trapped. He believed her when she said that Thomas's death was inevitable, that it was the only way for them to escape the lies. She convinced him it was necessary, a way to cleanse their lives and start fresh. Emily's plan was cold and calculated, like everything else she did. She had thought through every detail, aware that George's fragile emotional state made him easy to manipulate. The plan was simple but ruthless, leaving little trace. She gave George clear instructions, reassuring him that once it was done, they would finally be free. No more secrets, no more guilt. George, despite his inner turmoil, let his emotions cloud his judgment. He was too far gone, too deeply in love with Emily to turn back now. 4 days later, on the night of March 6, 2014, the plan reached its violent conclusion. The Peterson household, usually quiet and peaceful, became the site of a horrific crime. Thomas's lifeless body was discovered in the greenhouse, his head shattered by a heavy object. Blood pooled around him, staining the floor where he had once tenderly cared for his plants. The greenhouse, once a place where Thomas found peace in his work, was now marred by violence and death. The discovery of Thomas's body sent shockwaves through the community. News of the tragedy spread quickly, with neighbors gathering outside the Peterson home, confused and disturbed. The family was well known in the neighborhood, and Thomas's flower shops had long been a staple of the local economy. The idea that such a brutal crime could befall someone so respected was unimaginable. The police arrived quickly, led by Detective Martin Collins, a seasoned investigator with years of experience handling violent crimes. As he surveyed the scene, Collins immediately sensed something was amiss. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing seemed to be missing. The initial theory of a robbery gone wrong, which seemed plausible at first, quickly fell apart. This crime was personal. Its precision and brutality pointed to someone close to Thomas. By March 8, 2014, the investigation was in full swing. The police began interviewing everyone connected to Thomas, starting with Emily. She played the role of the grieving widow almost flawlessly, but to Detective Collins, something seemed off. Emily appeared upset, but her tears seemed too controlled, her emotions too calculated. She calmly explained how Thomas had come home late the night before the murder and how she had gone to bed early, unaware of anything unusual. Despite her composed demeanor, Collins couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Emily's behavior after the murder was odd. In the days following the tragedy, she didn't appear genuinely grief-stricken. Her routine barely changed. While others in her position might have been overwhelmed by sorrow, Emily carried on as if nothing significant had occurred. Her lack of genuine emotion raised red flags for the detective. Something about her story just didn't add up. Then, on March 20, 2014, a breakthrough came when a hidden phone was found in Emily's closet. The discovery blew the investigation wide open. The phone contained explicit text messages between Emily and George, revealing the full scope of their affair. The texts were detailed, discussing their plans to get rid of Thomas and even hinting at the exact day they would do it. George appeared hesitant in the messages, but it was clear that Emily had orchestrated everything,
pushing him toward committing the unthinkable. With this new evidence, Detective Collins knew the investigation had reached a critical turning point. George's involvement was undeniable, and the truth was now just a matter of time. Emily, however, continued to deny everything, insisting the messages were nothing more than fantasy. She portrayed herself as the victim, claiming George had misunderstood their conversations. She painted George as a grieving man who had manipulated her, casting herself as an innocent woman caught in a tragic misunderstanding. But George's guilt was too great to conceal. After the evidence surfaced, he began to unravel. By April 1, 2014, George had completely withdrawn from his usual social circles and family gatherings. His once strong presence had crumbled, and he could barely look his grandchildren in the eyes. The weight of his actions consumed him. He no longer spoke about the future or offered advice. He was a shell of the man he once was, destroyed by his own guilt. When the police finally brought him in for questioning on April 1st, George's calm facade shattered. Confronted with the phone records, George broke down, confessing to the affair. He explained how Emily had drawn him in, using his grief and vulnerability to manipulate him. He admitted that he had fallen for her, but he strongly denied any involvement in Thomas's murder. George described how the affair had spiraled out of control, but he couldn't bring himself to confess to the ultimate crime. Emily, however, remained composed as George confessed. She stuck to her story, continuing to claim that the messages were simply part of a fantasy and denying any plot to harm Thomas. She placed all the blame on George, insisting he had acted out of desperation. But the overwhelming evidence, combined with George's broken confession, told a different story, one of a manipulative woman who had carefully orchestrated her husband's downfall. As the case moved forward, the community was left reeling from the betrayal, wondering how such darkness had been hidden beneath the surface of such a respected family. On April 15, 2014, the quiet streets of the London neighborhood buzzed with shock as both Emily and George were arrested for Thomas's murder. The news spread rapidly, reaching every corner of the community. This was no ordinary crime. It was a betrayal that cut deep, shaking the very foundation of the Peterson family. A family once admired for their success and respectability, Emily had always been seen as the devoted wife, while George had long been respected as a wise and strong figure. The revelation of their affair and involvement in Thomas's death left everyone in disbelief. The trial, which began in early 2015, became a spectacle, drawing crowds from across the city. The courthouse was packed every day with neighbors, colleagues, and even the local media eager to witness the downfall of a family that had once seemed perfect. Cameras captured every moment, and reporters painted Emily as a cold, calculating woman who had manipulated an old man into killing her husband. George, the once proud and respected elder of the community, appeared broken. He looked older than his 65 years, his shoulders slumped, and his face gaunt, as though the weight of his actions had drained the life out of him. Throughout the trial, George broke down multiple times, overwhelmed with guilt. He admitted to the affair, explaining how Emily had slowly gained control of him, drawing him deeper into her web of manipulation. He described how he had never intended for Thomas to die, insisting that his involvement had spiraled out of control under Emily's influence. His remorse was evident, and many in the courtroom felt sympathy for him, but his confession, although filled with regret, did little to absolve him of his role in the crime. Emily, in stark contrast, exuded confidence. She sat in the courtroom with a calm and composed demeanor, showing no signs of guilt like the kind that consumed George. Even as the gruesome details of the murder were laid out, she remained firm in her defense, claiming that George had acted on his own and that she had never intended for things to escalate so far. She maintained that their messages, which clearly outlined a plan to kill Thomas, were nothing more than a fantasy misunderstood by an old man who had become infatuated with her. To the jury and everyone watching, Emily's lack of remorse was chilling. Her cold detachment from the events made it clear that she was the mastermind behind the entire scheme. She had manipulated George from the start, exploiting his vulnerability and using his love for her as a tool to achieve her own ends. It became clear that Emily's motive was never love, but power. The power to control the Peterson family, take over the flower shop business, and rid herself of the marriage that had kept her trapped in a life of duty and routine. George, once a man of integrity, had been reduced to a pawn in her calculated plan, falling so deeply into sin that he could no longer find a way out. As the trial continued, the emotional toll on the Peterson family became increasingly visible. Lily, now 17, and Max, 13, were forced to endure the painful details of their father's murder while also grappling with their mother's betrayal. Lily, who had always admired her mother's strength, was left heartbroken, struggling to reconcile the woman who raised her with the cold manipulator described in court. Max, still so young, could barely comprehend how his entire world had collapsed. The loss of his father and the destruction of his family weighed heavily on him. Both children were left to navigate the shame and confusion that followed them everywhere they went. On October 10, 2015, the verdict was delivered. The jury, after hearing all the details of the case, found Emily guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison, a decision that brought some closure to the community but left many unanswered questions. George, although spared from a life sentence, faced his own punishment. He was convicted of lesser charges, but his reputation was irreparably damaged, and his guilt would haunt him for the rest of his life. The social circles where he had once been respected no longer welcomed him, and his family ties were shattered beyond repair. In the aftermath of the trial, the Peterson family was left in ruins. The flower shop business, once a source of pride, struggled to survive. Without Thomas's leadership and with George's involvement in the scandal, many customers abandoned them, and the community's trust in the family was broken. Lily and Max were left to navigate life without the guidance of their parents, both of whom were lost to them in different ways. Lily, standing on the brink of adulthood, bore the family's shame on her shoulders. She tried to stay strong for Max, but the trauma of losing both parents, one to murder and the other to the justice system, took a heavy toll. She often reflected on the days before everything fell apart, wondering how her mother had managed to hide such darkness beneath their seemingly perfect light. Max, still so young, struggled to find his place in a world where both his parents had betrayed him. The emotional scars left by the trial would follow him and his sister for the rest of their lives. As the dust settled on the trial, the community remained divided. Some viewed George as a man who had been led astray, a victim of Emily's manipulation. Others believed that he too bore responsibility for the tragedy, unable to escape the consequences of his own actions. But the most lingering question was, what had truly driven Emily to orchestrate such a horrific act? Was it simply a desire for freedom, or was there something deeper? A hunger for power and control, buried beneath her facade of devotion and duty? The unraveling of Emily's affair and her cold manipulation of George left an indelible mark on the community. It served as a grim reminder that even the most outwardly perfect lives could hide unimaginable darkness. The betrayal, the murder, and the trial left the neighborhood grappling with the haunting truth that appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes those we trust the most are the ones capable of causing the greatest harm.
Wednesday morning, October 25, 2023, a tragedy unfolded in Dallas, Texas when the lifeless body of a woman was found abandoned on the roadside. The victim had gunshot wounds on the chest, and it seemed she was shot on the scene the previous day. When the police arrived, they discovered that the body belonged to Dishai Stevenson, a 34-year-old businesswoman, wife, and mother. The previous night, she had been with her husband, Michael Smith, but by morning, she was on the roadside dead. The most unsettling part of the story is that Michael, her husband, was the last person to see her alive. This shocking turn of events would later be linked to mounting tension between the couple and the shocking discovery of the main reason an innocent woman was murdered. This is the tragic story of Dishai Stevenson, a woman whose life ended too soon. Before we go further into the events that transpired, we would like to offer our condolences to her loved ones, especially her teenage daughter, who must now face a life without her mother. Also, we would like to take this crime case as a close reminder to everyone to recognize warning signs in relationships. The story takes us to Dallas, Texas, a city situated in the southern United States, in North Texas. Unfortunately, it has a relatively high crime rate, with around 46 crimes per 1,000 residents, which is almost double the state average of around 27 crimes per 1,000 people. This could also be because Dallas is a very large city. Born on November 16, 1988, Dishai Stevenson was the epitome of a self-made woman. She had built a life for herself in Dallas, where she ran multiple successful businesses. Dishai had a boutique called Shea Money Purses and More LLC, where she sold a variety of fashion items like male and female clothing, purses, hats, lashes, and more. She also operated a tax preparation service, helping clients file tax refunds, which can be a good source of income in the United States. Dishai's drive for financial independence was very impressive, and she knew this. In fact, her Facebook nickname is listed as Money Mac Dishai, and on Instagram, it's Shea Money. Dishai was not shy to promote her business or tell the world that she was a thriving businesswoman. Because she was a hard worker, her businesses grew. She had just acquired a space in May 2022 that she had hoped would become her long-term shop. She thanked God for being able to get her store and was congratulated by friends. Dishai was also very close with her family and friends. She enjoyed cooking and having family gatherings. She wasn't just passionate about her business ventures. She also loved helping people, which made her loved by those who worked with and around her. She was generous with her time, love, and money, especially toward her family and friends. Now, let's talk about her personal life. Dishai's world revolved around her 16-year-old daughter, Maya, whom she showered with love and care. She was married to her husband, Michael, but Maya was from a former relationship. Dishai loved her husband, but she was also a doting mother who made sure her daughter had everything she needed, even giving her a new car for her 16th birthday, which was a symbol of her hard work and the life she could build. It was clear that family was important to Dishai because she also posted videos of her nieces, nephews, and even her goddaughter to wish them a happy birthday. She was also the primary caretaker for her mother, who had suffered a stroke and was left partially paralyzed. Balancing her entrepreneurial ventures with her caregiving responsibilities, Dishai's life was a constant juggle, but she did it with grace, always with a smile on her face. Despite her successful and demanding life, Dishai still found time to be a life-of-the-party type of person. She had a larger-than-life personality, always ensuring that everyone around her felt good. Even with all the good things happening in Dishai's life, her relationship with Michael Smith, her husband, would take a drastic turn. Michael Smith, 39 years old, had been a significant part of Dishai's life for years. To those looking in from the outside, he seemed quiet and easygoing, which appeared to be a fitting match for Dishai's energetic personality. They had been in a relationship for a long time, experiencing the usual ups and downs of couples. However, their relationship was more complex than it appeared on the surface. Dishai had maintained a long-distance relationship with Michael while he was incarcerated. Her loyalty to him never wavered during his time in prison, which began in 2016. Throughout his incarceration, she visited him, called him, and remained faithful, waiting for him to come home. This unwavering support was a testament to Dishai's loving and empathetic nature. When Michael was released from prison on May 17, 2021, Dishai wanted to ensure he felt appreciated and loved after missing out on so much. She planned a significant surprise for his return, a wedding. Just a week after his release, they tied the knot on May 24, 2021, at the courthouse. Later, on September 9, 2022, Dishai hosted an elaborate wedding celebration for them, taking care of everything from the rings to the entire ceremony. Given Michael's recent release from prison, Dishai became the sole financial provider in their relationship. Despite this potentially awkward situation, she didn't seem to mind. In an Instagram post, Dishai expressed her deep love for Michael, writing, "I already married the love of my life on May 24, 2021. I really prayed and cried out to God to send me somebody to love me for the real me. God sent me a king. My husband is so faithful to me. He's not running around making me look stupid. My husband is one of a kind. Good, bad, happy, or sad. That's my husband. I cry so much before. I never felt this kind of love before. It's scary because he treats me like a queen. He shows me what love really means. I married a man, not a little boy." Dishai's love for Michael was expressed in extraordinary ways. She supported him financially, emotionally, and in every aspect she could. To her, she had married a king who loved her and treated her like a queen. She lavished him with love, funding extravagant vacations and throwing lavish birthday parties where she gifted him expensive presents like a diamond ring and even $10,000 in cash. Dishai consistently went the extra mile for Michael, handling all financial and planning aspects of their life together.
Their marriage appeared to be a celebration of their bond, seemingly kept alive by Dishai's financial and emotional investments.
However, beneath this surface of apparent marital bliss, there were troubling signs that would later come to light. Michael's background starkly contrasted with Dishai's. Growing up in a challenging environment, he had to fend for himself from an early age. Unlike Dishai's supportive family dynamic, Michael's history was marred by drug abuse and a stint in prison, which put him significantly behind his peers in terms of financial stability and social status. As Dishai's businesses flourished and her reputation as a successful entrepreneur grew, Michael's resentment and jealousy intensified. This dynamic is not uncommon in relationships where there's a significant disparity in career success between partners. Men, in particular, may experience feelings of inadequacy, threats to their masculinity, and fears about changing relationship dynamics when their female partners outperform them professionally too. Traditional gender roles and societal expectations often exacerbate these feelings, leading men to question their value and role in the relationship. Research has shown that economic distress and perceived financial strain can significantly increase the risk of intimate partner violence too. In couples experiencing high levels of subjective financial strain, the likelihood of intimate partner violence rises to 9.5%, compared to 2.7% in couples with low levels of financial strain.
Who overthinks everything? Who showers less? Who is always eating? Who has a nicer butt? Who is more possessive? Who drools more? Who is a better driver?
Despite noticing subtle changes in the relationship, friends and family failed to grasp the full severity of the situation. Dishai, ever loyal, continued to lavish attention and gifts on Michael, buying matching clothes and covering all expenses in an attempt to show her love and support. However, Michael's jealousy extended beyond Dishai's professional success. He became increasingly possessive and controlling, a pattern that worsened as his drug addiction resurfaced. The once loving relationship became fraught with tension and red flags. More frequent arguments and fights began to take their toll on Dishai, the man she had sacrificed everything for. The one she believed would be her source of peace had transformed into someone unrecognizable. Tragically, this same person would ultimately become her murderer. On October 21, 2023, Dishai Stevenson called her sister Jasmine to wish Jasmine's son a happy birthday. During their conversation, Dishai made a chilling statement. "Sister, I feel like I'm going to die." Jasmine, taken aback, brushed it off at the time, not realizing the gravity of her sister's words. Dishai had promised to bring a gift for her nephew but never showed up.
She called me, she wished me happy birthday. He was like, you know, normal, whatever. We was laughing, joking. And then she just said, like, sister, I feel like I'm finna die.
On October 24, 2023, Dishai's 16-year-old daughter became concerned when she couldn't reach her mother. This was highly unusual, as Dishai was known for always being in touch with her daughter and for her role as a caregiver to her partially paralyzed mother. The family's concern grew as they began searching for Dishai. When the family contacted Michael Smith, Dishai's husband, he denied knowing her whereabouts. They tracked Dishai's car to the Pleasant Village apartments, where Michael's father lived. Jasmine Stevenson and their cousin, Nita, noticed a large handprint on the driver's window of Dishai's car, raising suspicions. Shortly after, they learned from a community blog about a woman found shot to death nearby. Upon arriving at the scene, officers confirmed their worst fears. The police investigation quickly uncovered disturbing evidence. In Michael's car, they found red bodily fluids, a bullet casing, and a single sandal matching what Dishai had last been seen wearing. Surveillance footage showed both Dishai and Michael arriving separately at the apartment complex, with Dishai then getting into Michael's car. A disturbance was observed inside the vehicle. Dishai's body was discovered on the morning of October 25, 2023, on the side of a road in Dallas, Texas. She had been shot at close range in the chest. As news of Dishai's death spread, law enforcement launched a manhunt for Michael. They tracked him to his home, where they found multiple firearms, and later apprehended him at a nearby barbershop. Michael claimed he had been under the influence of PCP at the time of the shooting. Michael Smith, 39, was arrested and charged with murder. He remains in custody with a bond set at $1 million. The case is currently set for a jury trial, with Smith having been indicted by a grand jury for murder. This tragic event has left Dishai's family, especially her 16-year-old daughter, devastated and searching for answers. Jasmine Stevenson expressed the family's pain, asking, "Why would you take my sister from us?"
She did everything. My sister did everything for him. It was nothing he couldn't ask her for. She did everything. She did everything in her power to show him that she...
The investigation into Dishai Stevenson's murder continues as authorities piece together the tragic final moments of her life. Michael Smith remains in custody, held on a $1 million bond. If he cannot pay this substantial amount, he will remain in jail until his court date is set and he is sentenced. Dishai's family is left heartbroken, struggling to comprehend the senseless violence that took their loved one. Her 16-year-old daughter, who shared a close bond with her mother, is especially devastated. Dishai had been a constant presence in her life, always ensuring she was cared for and loved. Now, the teenager must grapple with the loss of not only her mother but also the man who had been a part of their lives for years. Jasmine Stevenson, Dishai's sister, expressed the family's pain and confusion. She knew something was wrong when her niece called, as Dishai never left her daughter or partially paralyzed mother unattended. Jasmine voiced frustration over the red flags present in the relationship that weren't fully recognized in time to prevent the tragedy. She noted that Michael always appeared nice and friendly in front of the family, making his actions even more shocking. Why? Why would you take her away from us? She gave you everything, and you still took her life, Jasmine asked, heartbroken and enraged. Anita Stevenson, Dishai's cousin, revealed in an interview that just days before the incident, Dishai had spoken about wanting to save her marriage at all costs. This makes the story even more heart-wrenching, as the person responsible wasn't a stranger but her husband, the man she had supported through his incarceration and beyond. Court records show that authorities built their case based on surveillance footage and physical evidence from Michael's vehicle, including red bodily fluids, a bullet casing, and one of Dishai's sandals. Multiple firearms were also found during a search of his residence. The family is confident that the evidence is sufficient to secure a conviction. This tragic case highlights the complex dynamics of domestic violence, particularly in relationships where one partner feels overshadowed by the other's success. Michael's feelings of inadequacy, compounded by his substance abuse issues, likely contributed to the fatal confrontation. It serves as a stark reminder of the importance of recognizing warning signs in relationships and the need for support systems for those experiencing domestic abuse. As Deshay's family mourned their devastating loss, they also called for justice. They grappled with haunting questions. Why had Michael committed this heinous act? What triggered such violence? And most crucially, how had they missed the warning signs that might have saved Deshay's life? Deshay's tragic death illuminates the broader issue of domestic violence. Michael's feelings of inadequacy, likely exacerbated by Deshay's financial success and independence, combined with his substance abuse issues, may have fueled his violent outburst. His inability to accept Deshay's achievements became a source of tension, ultimately leading to the fatal confrontation. This aligns with studies showing that men's economic frustration or inability to fulfill societal expectations of being the breadwinner can contribute to the perpetration of physical and sexual violence within the homemate. Domestic violence often goes unnoticed, especially when the signs are subtle. In Deshay's case, her love for Michael and her desire to support him may have blinded her to the dangerous undercurrents in their relationship. She believed that her loyalty, financial support, and devotion would be enough to keep the relationship stable. However, Michael's toxic behavior and substance abuse issues created a volatile situation. This case highlights the complex dynamics of power and control in abusive relationships. The National Council Against Domestic Violence notes that batterers often begin and continue their behavior because violence is an effective method for gaining and keeping control over another person. 10. Michael's actions fit this pattern, using violence as a means to assert dominance over Deshay. As we reflect on this tragic case, it's important to consider the various factors that may have contributed to the violence. Was it Deshay's success that triggered Michael's actions? Was it primarily a financial issue, or were there deeper, ingrained patterns of aggression? These questions underscore the complexity of domestic violence situations and the need for comprehensive support and intervention strategies. By sharing Deshay's story, we hope to raise awareness about the warning signs of domestic violence and the importance of seeking help. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out to local support services or national hotlines for assistance. Remember, no one deserves to live in fear or under the threat of violence. Thank you for watching this video and engaging with this important topic. Your thoughts and experiences shared in the comments below can help others learn and potentially recognize warning signs in their own relationships. Together, we can work towards breaking the cycle of domestic violence and creating safer communities for all.